Hello, everyone. Happy May. We're in the fifth month.
Yes, we are.
Thank you all so much for joining. We're in the second part of a thing in the fifth month in the year of our voyage, 2026.
It's too early for numbers, okay? It's just too early for I can't math the math, okay? I just can't do it at the moment.
Oh no.
But the math isn't mathing because it seems like this administration has been in for 10 years so far and running. So yeah, it's wild. Time is somehow passing very quickly and then taking forever. So work that out if you can.
Stress does it. I figured that out in the military.
Yeah, fair enough.
Each individual day takes forever.
Right. There's some kind of time dilation for stress. I gotcha. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm on board. Yes, absolutely.
Hell yeah. And speaking of being on board with things, thank you so much for joining. I know we're at each other's places every weekend, but it's still, it's
yeah.
Yeehaw. So we are doing part 2. This is Alex O'Connor versus Glen Scrivener on the question is, did Christianity or is Christianity responsible for Western values or something along those lines? Part 1, of course, is linked in the description. That's over at Mark's Place. Make sure you subscribe to both channels if you have not already, because next week we'll be at Mark's and the week after we'll be back here, and so on and so on.
And like, how long have we been going for now? Like 3-4 years or something? It's actually been a long, like I hadn't realized how long it's been because I enjoy it so much. It's just been, like we started this, it feels like this administration's been going longer than our show, but that's just not true. That's just not true. It's wild, right? Yeah, and it's my pleasure to be here. Absolutely, I always love visiting the Ember Barn or whatever it is. Let's do some barn burning. Yeah, let's do it.
I can probably help with that. Let me see here.
Okay, yeah, all right.
What do we got? What do we got?
Fire, thing, graphic or something.
Lava?
Yeah, there
magma?
You go. Wow, all right.
Oh, here's a fire. Here we go.
Is that magma or is that the sun? I don't know. It doesn't look like magma to be. It looks like this, the sun.
I thought it was kind of sun-like too, although the sun surface is a little spikier with the intense electromagnetic field. I mean, of course, it's a computer-generated graphic, but it's labeled as lava BG loop.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to choose to believe it's the sun. All right. I'm going to choose to believe.
Stellar.
Yeah. Okay. It's indeed stellar. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly what it is. Yes, the sun is stellar and a stellar object. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we could also go to heaven if you like. It's hard to tell, but that actually is a cross behind us.
I think that it's overrated, quite frankly. I'm fine with the fires of hell. Give me the fires of hell. At least I'll be warm.
It's true.
Look, you know what they say, and I'm going to steal this from Terry Pratchett. Give a man a fire, he's warm for a night. Set a man on fire, he's warm for the rest of his life.
Very wise, Sir Terry.
Yeah, very true. Very wise. Yeah, very practical. Yeah, I chose this debate because it annoyed me. Because it always annoys me when people try to claim civilization in the name of one religion or one ideology or just one thing, basically. Just the thing. It's like saying, hey, Western values were given to us by capitalism. It's like, no. Or Western civilization was built by white men. It's like, no. I think that there's so many things adding to it. No one can claim Western civilization. No one can just go, oh, well, that's the result of this one thing. No.
Right.
No.
It's like a lot of the other things, the single cause thinking that we run into with a lot of frankly, theistic arguments. It's not exclusively
Right.
theists who do it, but it
Right.
always comes up when you're discussing with theists. Almost nothing in reality has one single cause. Everything it has, much like you have multiple parents and even more grandparents and even more great grandparents.
Right.
Every single event is the result of a conglomeration, a multitude of causes that come together in a certain way to cause the event to happen the way it did. Everything in reality is like that.
Well, I think what Glenn's doing in this debate is sort of saying, hey, if Christianity didn't exist, we wouldn't have the Western civilization that we have. But the same argument could be used for, say, Greek society. If they didn't have democracy, we wouldn't have the Western society that we have. Or if the Romans weren't around, we wouldn't have the Western society that we had. If the the Celtic tribes and the interactions between the Romans and the Anglo-Saxons in order to produce you know what I mean? Like it's one of those butterfly effect things that if you take any part of it away, you're not going to have exactly the same outcome. But I think that they want to sort of say, hey, Christianity will lead necessarily to the same kind of Western civilization. And I don't think that's true, because you had the Byzantines, they still ran slavery, they still ran all of these different things. They were Orthodox Christian. They were earliest form of Orthodox Christian. So like it's just this case of, well, we want to claim this on our religion's behalf, and we're going to ignore every other input that's ever been put into it, and any other influence, which I think is a huge mistake. Huge mistake.
Yeah, there's so much. Like we're seeing in the chat, Let Something Shine says Delphic maxims are very Western. There is a lot from ancient Greece, and there's a lot from Celts and from the Norse. And I'm influenced. The concept of Western values itself is a bit of a racism, for lack of a better term. It's very culturocentric, because there isn't really any such thing as Western culture. It's like Judeo-Christian traditions. It's a conglomeration of unrelated things. Well, vaguely historically related. But you don't have Western values without Eastern values, without African values. And so, because the world is interconnected.
And I mean, at a base level, a lot of them are very similar. I mean, if you look at, I was watching a thing on a like it does a lot of things. It does true crime. It does bad people doing things. But this was on in China, a shopping mall collapsed basically because the owner was really dodgy, kind of thing, and skipped a lot of steps, and like they went through it all, and it was just also, some people survived. One guy basically survived by drinking water that was coming down from the fire hoses and eating cardboard. It was crazy. But
Wow.
hey, whatever you got to do to survive, right? And there were not only people were just coming to help, kind of thing. Like people were just running to help. And so this whole idea about Western values, if people are in danger and they need help, it's not sort of Western value is charity and doing that. People will help each other in other cultures that aren't Western. It doesn't mean that it's a Western thing, for people to help one another, feed one another, clothe one another. People have been doing that all over the world for ages. Like it's not this exclusive thing to Western culture. So I think some of the values they want to claim, so Glen Scrivener's trying to sell a book, like a Be Forewarned.
Of course.
It's like the air we breathe kind of thing, that these Western values are so ingrained we don't notice them. But I would actually go sort of to a lower substrata than that. I would sort of say that the the ideas of empathy and reciprocity and, societal values are sort of intrinsic to human beings, to people that share a common society. If someone's in trouble, you go to help them, because if you're in trouble, they would come to help you. It's just that reciprocity kind of thing. So I think that he's trying to claim, it's very pre-suppy, isn't it? Just trying to claim everything as a Christian thing, and like, well, you owe this to God kind of thing. And it's like, nah, I don't think so.
Yeah, like we saw in that earlier debate with Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules, where he laid out this idea that Christianity is the water we drink, but it's also the well, and it's the builder of the well, and it's the bucket you draw the water up from. And Stephen's like, I think all those things were there before Christianity.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yep.
We're just going to claim all of it, though. It's all ours.
It's our well now. Yeah.
This is where young Earth bullshit comes from. It's saying nothing actually existed, not philosophically, not truly, until we showed up.
Well, I mean, I had that argument with Joel Sedekase, and he sort of said, science only exists because of Christianity. And I pointed out, but people in ancient Greece, before Christianity was a thing, were doing science, like a very sort of, primitive form of it. But sure, it was that observation, experimentation kind of thing. And he's like, yeah, but they weren't doing it in line with their beliefs or something. And it's like, what? Like, he thinks that science wasn't valid until Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even joking.
Articles, it's just educated guesses.
Right. Somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It's
totally missing
wild.
that you can do the same thing with anything else. You can say, oh, well, it was actually Odin who made science work.
Right.
Before Odin, it was, people got lucky from time to time, but the universe wasn't like governed by laws the way it is now.
Right. But the question comes, like, if it produces reliable results, then how is it not working? Like, how is it not sciencing if it produces reliable results? Like, I have no idea. It is just wild. It's wild.
Yeah. It can be fun, and hopefully we have some fun today, because
yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of video.
I think when I was like going through it to see if it was suitable for a debate review kind of thing, I think it did pick up in the second half. So strap yourself in, get a snack. I think so. Alex is sort of prodded gently, and I've noticed this of O'Connor. He has this way of, he's very different than Hitchens. Hitchens will come out like with a shock and awe campaign. I think Alex O'Connor is sort of gently probes, finds where your flaws are, and then he really attacks them kind of thing, like really insistent attack. So I've noticed that about him. He's sort of gentle at first, and it may lull. I don't know why he does. Maybe that's just in, the nature of how he is. Maybe it is to sort of get the theist into a false sense of security. But it's very effective, because, he will really formulate his sort of attack plan and then really, really hit them. And I do like it. I don't agree with everything that Alex O'Connor does, but hey, he's got a really good tactics for debate.
Yeah, it's a people skill kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of.
Because like there's debate, and then there's also peopling, and peopling can be useful for your debate, because if you can get your opponent to relax and drop their guard and be like, oh, there's no personal attacks here, I don't have to worry, we're just discussing philosophical stuff, and surely God will be on my side. And then Alex, he lulls you, and and he's like, well, isn't it interesting that in the book of Genesis, chapter 24, verse 46 or whatever, and he just goes on, and he raises interesting subjects, and because he has studied this shit, he's able to ask questions that he knows you already know the answer to, but he's moving chess pieces. And eventually he'll reach a point where he's got the chess pieces where he wants them, and then the knight will jump and capture your queen, you know?
Revealed check, you know. Yeah.
Or at least that's something along the lines of what he used to do. These days it's more, John Lennox is one of the greatest thinkers of all time. You should buy his book and convert to Christianity with my code Alex24 or whatever, you know.
Oh,
Like,
that
Alex, what are you
interview
doing?
was that interview was crazy. That was that was crazy. John Lennox, that was, I don't know what is up with that guy. I think so. I don't know.
Yep. Who can speculate? Maybe it's a grander ruse, and he's trying to ingratiate himself with the more smooth-brained apologists so that he can get deeper into their midst, and then pull a double Uno reverse. Probably not. It's probably money, but because it's always fucking money. But I mean, maybe he's like, I have enough money now. It's time for the sudden yet inevitable betrayal. I don't know. All right, let's do the thing.
Just be a bit too simple. You know what I mean? Yeah, it absolutely would. And this is why. Did you find the verse? Yeah. Are you talking about Exodus 22:29? Maybe I've got the verse wrong. What does that say? Exodus 22:29. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. That can't be it. What's next? The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with his mother. On the eighth day, you shall give it to me. The firstborn.
Okay, yeah, that's the verse he was talking about before, when they got off onto the Romans and shit while Glenn was looking. But yeah, that's what he was talking about, is that it pretty clearly says sacrifice your children the same way you sacrifice your cattle. And then later in other verses it's renegotiated as you have to redeem your child. You can't not redeem your child.
The same way that you do with the oxen and the sheep. So they were ransomed, and I don't know what the price was, but that was the cost of that life was given towards the temple as money. Well, that's what they say.
They were ransoms, yes. So, but if you can't afford to pay the ransom,
then what? Then what, Glenn?
Then what? Yeah.
I also enjoy that he used ransom. Most people, including most of us, because we want to, not be accused of bad faith engagement, will say redeemed, which is the word apologists use for that.
Yes.
But Glenn's like, no, it's a ransom.
It's a ransom. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with, that's a good Western value. We hold your children ransom and kill them if you don't pay. Nothing. That's a good Western value, right?
It's true. We did it for centuries.
Yep.
That particular instance, it's even within Exodus. You're doing elsewhere in Exodus. Okay. Let's not get caught up on that verse. There's some, this is my issue with. I think you're going to the Bible in a way that's alien to the way that anybody has ever gone to the Bible.
Yes, no one has ever critically read the Bible by looking at what it says.
Yeah,
it's totally unique to Alex. Yes.
Yeah. And biblical scholars, and even he says it's a ransom. What happens to someone who's up for ransom that they don't get the ransom? What do they do with them? Oh, they just give them a pat on the head and let them go home, right? Right, Glenn? Yeah, that's what happens.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah.
To go into a verse and take out of it as a timeless principle that stands by itself and probably could cause somebody to kill their son is just not the way. I mean, Christians, that they don't read their Bibles that way. You must know Christian.
I thought he was going to stop with they don't read their Bible.
Yeah, that would be accurate.
Yeah, they don't read it that way. That's sort of the point.
History, that's not the way that Christendom has read the Bible in that way. So what are you right about reading the Bible that way? And the rest of what I'm doing is I'm showing it's a bit too simple to do this, right? I'm trying to demonstrate, because obviously the view, the sort of approach that I'm taking here, you will see as illegitimate, and I think is illegitimate to some degree. I think it's got some even within Exodus, but yes. But then Exodus is a series of sort of renegotiations over scriptural history. I mean, I'm not the first person to think that particular verse is an instance command for human sacrifice that survives into the biblical tradition that is then renegotiated. Scholars, debated, of course, but what I'm saying is I could do that, but I think it would be too lazy. What we need to do is look at the overall picture that we get from these stories. What is the picture that we get from reading the Old Testament and this God? And what is the picture that we get of Jesus and his relationship to that God? That might be a helpful place. And where does that give us these ideas of compassion and equality?
So I mean, the big picture thing, without getting into the weeds of the Exodus thing, and
you're going to go to the first page of the Bible, which I think might actually be the second page of the Bible. Okay, I'm actually going to go to Genesis 22. I'm going to go to Abraham and Isaac. A wonderful proclamation.
All right,
awesome. Abraham and Isaac.
Why?
Love it.
Okay.
Let's go further into the child sacrifice stuff, because I don't know if he's going to mention it, but as many of you recall, I have asked Dr. Kipp, an Old Testament scholar specializes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, about this specifically. And in his professional opinion, the original version of the story, Abraham doesn't get stopped. It is a story of child sacrifice, and we can see echoes of it later in the same story, because Abraham comes down the mountain and Isaac doesn't. And Abraham goes into town and Isaac isn't there, and people notice Isaac isn't there. It's very clear that there was a retcon later on because they realized the story was talking about child sacrifice.
Right. I did not know that. I knew that sort of the when you say you should like the temple would you need to consecrate, I believe is the word they use. I was trying to remember the word, but it's consecrate your firstborn to God. That a lot of scholars believe, and it is debated, it definitely is debated within the theological scholar, like the biblical scholar circles, but a lot of them do believe that means to sacrifice your firstborn to God, basically make a sacrifice of them, just like your bulls and your sheep and your goats and everything else. I'm not a biblical scholar, but for Glenn to say nobody takes that reading of the Bible is just false. A lot of biblical scholars do, including some Christian scholars, and sort of say, well, it's a leftover from the way that they lived back there. And yeah, fair enough. We're not doing presentism. We're not going to say, hey, they were evil people or something. It was just the way that their society was set up. But that doesn't mean that, I get what Alex is doing, because he said if you're going to take Christianity as a whole, Christendom as a whole, responsible for values, there's two places you can take those values from, either from the Bible or the church is the two places that he sort of said, right? Like he's trying to sort of set it up as this. And sort of, the church has got that. If you go into church history, it's not going to have modern Western. I mean, seriously, like the horrible things that the church has done. Mostly the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox Church and all of these churches. He's basically pointing out that the Bible isn't responsible for them either. So where did they come from? I think he's sort of proffering as a sort of foil to Glenn's, well, Christianity is responsible for all Western values.
Yeah, because it drives me crazy. People these things clearly developed after Christianity was in charge, and in fact Christianity changed to keep up with them. So what do you mean? In fact, it'd be more correct to pose the reverse proposition that Western values shaped Christianity as it evolved.
Yeah.
Go there, and then we'll look at the bigger picture.
I mean, so the whole issue is Abraham is promised a seed. He and Sarah are totally childless. And after barrenness, miraculously, they finally have a son. He is the seed of Abraham, which is utterly messianic terms. He is the heir of the cosmos, the hope of the world. Here is this child, and then God goes and tested Abraham and says, Abraham, and he said to him, here I am, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah. Mount Moriah is where the temple is, so a mountain in the region of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now, even within Genesis, you're thinking, but he's the hope of the world. He's the heir of the cosmos. He's the seed of Abraham. And
That's such a weird way to phrase things too. He's the heir of the cosmos. He's gonna be the king of the world, the whole earth, but also everything else too. Now, I'll grant you that is very Western values. It's if I stick a flag in it, it's mine, regardless of who lives there.
Well, I mean, the spoiler alert, but the seed of the cosmos, the hope of the world, the whatever, married his cousin.
As was the trend at the time.
Yeah. I mean, Abraham was married to his half sister. That was Sarah, or Sarai, as she was known before they changed their names, presumably to get away from incest allegations. Isaac married his cousin, and Isaac's son, Jacob, married his cousin as well. Like this was a common trend for, I don't know if it was common in the region, but it's definitely common in that family. I mean, damn.
Yeah, gotta preserve the purity of the blood or something. And they wonder why the family all had visions of burning bushes and whatnot.
Yeah, or couldn't have children. You know, it's like, I wonder
Right.
why. I wonder why.
Yeah.
I wonder why they're infertile. And they just sort of said, well, God won't allow me to have children. No, I think it's because you're marrying your cousins. I really do. I really do.
I mean, it's quite possible. And this is the perfect screenshot for it too. Like, wait a second.
Wait a second. I'm not trying to get his point, because really it seems like if you're pointing out that if God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, and he's holding that up as a virtue, like, oh, Abraham went to do it, and it's like, is that good for your side? Whose side are you on? Wow.
I mean, from a Christian perspective, it seems like a virtue. It's saying, you know, are you able to sacrifice your, at the time, only son?
Yes.
Because I asked you to. And yet I will eventually, a few thousand years from now or whatever, sacrifice my only son for you, kind of thing.
But if you're taking it as a value, right, the value being clearly expressed in the Binding of Isaac story is obedience to God. So sort of zealotry in the face of, you know, a kind of something that you don't want to do, but you do anyway because God commands it. Obedience and loyalty to God, basically. That's the virtue that we're talking about here. But I would sort of contend, and I think this is the track that Alex is on, that is not a Western value, right? Obedience in the face of any request to an authority is not a Western value. I think that Western values are more like liberalism, that certain people have rights, and even the biggest authority in the land doesn't have the right to tell you to sacrifice a human being on the altar of anything, you know, like, so that person has a right to live, kind of thing. You know, you have a right to bodily autonomy, you have a right to bodily integrity, you have a right to freedom of speech. You know, you have these rights, and the precepts and the orthobros sort of say, well, they're imaginary rights, they don't exist. And it's like, well, in Western society, there is the idea of the social contract. You have these rights inherently, and you will bow to the will of the government as long as they uphold the rights that you don't give them. So we kind of live in a society, you know, I feel like I'm a meme at this point. We live in a society, like, but we've got to have some kind of social fabric where we sort of all are required to obey the law, but we have certain things we have rights for that aren't taken away unless we violate that law, and we come to a sort of mutual agreement between everybody of what that will be. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't seem like it is the best system. It's certainly, there's parts that are not working, especially the part that sort of says everyone will be held to the same laws and same standards. I get that there's problems there. Don't get me wrong, but you know, there's no reason to go, well, someone's not upholding the social contract. It's time to stomp everybody's faces. You know, like that isn't going to be a solution to the problems. So I don't think this is the big win that Glenn thinks it is. Oh, but he didn't actually sacrifice his son. Yeah, only because God stopped him.
In theory.
In theory, yes, in theory. I didn't know. Because I know that later in Genesis, from doing my Is God the Asshole, I know that later Isaac is doing stuff like he
does come back.
Yeah. So I don't know what that's all about.
Indeed. Dr. Gibbs says, is Glenn Shriver reading the title page of his Bible? He did say he was going to go back to page 1, so it could be.
Maybe,
it could be.
Maybe.
But he wants to read Genesis 22, chapter 122. I don't know. We'll find out. It'll be fun.
I think
told
it
to be
was.
sacrificed.
I think it was. Who was it? Douglas Adams that sort of said like scholars found the original Bible kind of thing, and the first page said this is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to people living or dead is purely coincidence, kind of thing. Like it was actually like, oh wow, okay, Douglas Adams taking shots.
Yeah, my goodness, and it's valid though, because like I remember there used to be a podcaster back in the days before podcasts. It was just internet radio. You know, I ran an internet radio show, and there were a bunch of other people. It was a person named Tu the Ranting Griffin. And he had a bit where he was like, Jesus Christ, you like a person from 2,000 years ago gets thawed out in the Smithsonian. They find him trapped in ice in the Holy Land for some reason. And they thaw him out. And he goes, Jesus Christ, you people believe that was Mikhail's D&D character.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And somehow through that sacrifice, because the whole world is going to be blessed through this famous golden child. And he's to be sacrificed as a burnt offering, which is a sacrifice of atonement, on a mountain in the region of Jerusalem. As the story progresses, the son has the wood on his back, the father has the fire and the knife, the tools of judgment, and he's trudging up a mountain in the region of Jerusalem on his way to become a sacrifice of atonement, this one who is the seed of Abraham, who is the heir of the cosmos. Abraham says, we will worship there, and then we will come back to you, which the New Testament picks up as he seems to have some kind of trust that through sacrifice and out the other side, somehow, the chosen one will come back to us. And obviously in that...
It's crossed my mind, as you may recall, long ago, I was on Aaron Ra's Bible study show, and there's a few other Bible folk who frequent that show, like Lawrence from the former Milwaukee Atheists. I think it's the Behold Network now, because Behold, I can't remember who brought up the idea, but it was one of the people on one of those panels that rather than the original version of the story being one of child sacrifice and that's it, that it was a resurrection, and that was later edited out because they were like, hold the fuck on, that fucks up our entire history. We can't have that. Oh, Dr. Kip was just on today, apparently.
Oh,
cool. So I still get the invites, right? Because Aaron just sends them to everyone who has ever been on the cast. And there's a bunch of people who occasionally drop by randomly. I suppose that technically means I have Dr. Kip's email address.
Don't talk, Dr. Kip.
Yeah, it's fine. I have other ways to reach Dr. Kip.
Fair enough.
It's Discord. I can say things to Dr.
I think you just open a window and blow a ram's horn. I think that's how you reach Dr. Kip. That's what I imagine is how you reach Dr. Kip, quite frankly. There you go.
Oh wait, what's the I know.
Was that "Oh Canada"? Is that "Oh Canada"?
Badly.
Very badly, yeah.
I'll stop.
moment, the angel of the Lord, yes, intercepts judgment and says, now I know that you fear me because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And he provides the ram in the thicket as a substitute for Isaac, the promised child. And so on that occasion, the ram is sacrificed, but Abraham had said a lamb will be provided. And so the whole thing ends with verse 14. Where is verse 14? So Abraham called the name of that place, this mountain in the region of Moriah, the Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, on the mountain of the Lord, it shall be provided. What shall be provided? The lamb, the true son, the seed of Abraham,
Oh,
heir of the cosmos.
come on.
And they knew.
Come on. This is so stupid. It is not a prophecy for Jesus, okay? It's not.
I mean, you knew he was going to go there.
I know. I thought only precepts believed that. Seriously? Because the problem is that if Isaac is the golden child, the chosen one, right? He was never killed in the story that you're quoting. Because, let's do an internal critique. Does it match the story of Jesus? No, Jesus was killed. He was sacrificed while Isaac wasn't. So was the lamb the allegory for Jesus? Because the lamb didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's sort of okay. So there's a lot, but I suppose the most relevant thing is this shows a thing that humans do, not just apologists, but humans in general. People will say crazy things often and loudly, and reasonable people come along and say that person is saying crazy things. But this one thing that person said doesn't sound crazy to me. So even though everything else they're saying, I'm aware, is very crazy, I will take that one thing that sounds reasonable and accept it anyway without any critical examination.
Right.
It's kind of disappointing, but we see it a lot. We've been seeing it a lot just this past week in our own communities, but that's a topic for another time.
And the whole idea that it's a prophecy, it really, I mean, I think it says at least once, now I know you haven't withheld, or you haven't, you're willing to sacrifice your only son for me. It's about loyalty. It's about God commanding something and Abraham being willing to do it, even though it's absolutely horrendous. It sort of says, oh, now I know you're willing to obey me. My thing in the sort of Bible review that I'm doing, it's sort of, shouldn't God already know that?
Right. But also, how monstrous, right? This is
yeah,
kind
absolutely.
of bullshit that we see in Reddit stories about crazy partners, you start dating someone and they're like, I want you to go kill that person. Prove you love me and kill that person. No, you're very crazy. I am not doing that. But they're like, no, worship this God though.
Yeah, so it says Abraham looked up and so the provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abram from heaven a second time. I will surely bless you, make your descendants numerous stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. And in 12 he says, do not lay a hand on the boy, do not do anything to him. Now that I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. So it's kind of weird. It's not a prophecy because he's basically saying, oh, it's good that you are willing to do this batshit crazy thing on my order. So now I know you fear me. And the point is, well, if you're omniscient, you should have known that already. You don't have to test people if you know what's in their heart already.
And or just trust or have faith. But also, if he knits you in your mother's womb, wonderfully and fearfully made, yada yada.
Right.
He should know. even without omniscience, because he made the version of you that will choose the thing he wants you to choose instead of the version that won't, unless he did choose that one, but then he already knew that too.
Right.
I don't understand. It's just contradictions. And I love it when the precepts are all like, oh, laws of logic, though. Yeah, laws of logic. Contradictions cannot exist in whole or in part in reality. So what up with your magic story? If you want the laws of logic, apply the laws of logic.
But miracles.
Mountain it was going to be on. And so this is a Christian way of reading the text, but I think it's a Christian way of reading the text that it is utterly consonant with the Hebrew details. But the way that Christians read Old Testament texts is not that, oh, here's an injunction. Abraham was told to do this very strange thing that, as you say, the Lord says, it never entered my mind to.
Well, it wasn't strange at the time. That's the thing. It wasn't strange at the time. Like when you're saying, oh, well, you have to do this strange thing. If you grew up in a culture that sacrificed its firstborn to Yahweh, as you know, some scholars argue that you know, a lot of scholars actually argue that that is the case, it wouldn't be strange to you.
Right. Like there's a lot of things that we do in our culture today that most people don't think is strange because it's just the way things are done. And then, you know, a neurodivergent person comes along and is like, why are you doing that thing that makes no sense?
Yeah. I mean, we shake hands. And we know where that came from. But we shake hands with people. We clasp hands. It's a weird thing. In Japan, you will bow. That's weird as well. Like, we do all of these behaviors that we honestly think are just normal.
Sure. I was thinking of segregated bathrooms, but
sure. I mean, you get unisex bathrooms as well. You get unisex bathrooms as well. It's not a big deal.
And yet, narratively, we are being told something about Christ and him crucified. And this is the way that Christians read Scripture, right?
Yeah.
Not as Abraham was told that, so I guess I can kill my son.
Of course, yeah.
But as
I'm going to say that's quite obviously a retcon. Like, seriously, that being Jesus, retcon all the way, retcon all the way.
I mean, it has to be, because I mean, for numerous reasons, we know that the Old Testament in no way was talking about Jesus.
Yes.
Take them through the cross.
Many scholars see this as kind of a mythological retelling of the story by which human sacrifice came to an end. The practice of human sacrifice got replaced by animal sacrifice, because at some point in our anthropological history this occurs, and many people see this as
not in the Bible, but
they see this as an encoding of this in the biblical story. That this is what it's described.
They're welcome, but within the world of the Bible, that's not.
I don't know if it's correct to say that human sacrifice got replaced with animal sacrifice. I think in the broader human tradition, perhaps, although it's not impossible that animal sacrifice was a thing before there was human sacrifice.
Right.
And
well, I think it's more complex than that. I think that, you know, sacrifice in general had many prongs, but at some point people said, well, no, stop sacrificing your children, kind of thing. I mean, there was there is a tendency for people in religions to show their fealty by sacrificing something to the god. And obviously, the more important the thing you sacrifice, the more you're showing your loyalty to the god, or gods, plural, in polytheistic times. So what could be more important than your child, especially your firstborn child, right? So... which is batshit crazy by our today's standards, because you're like, well, why would any, a god that wants your children or wants you to sacrifice your children is, why would you follow that god, even if, that's ridiculous. But I think at the time it was like, well, the greater thing that you sacrifice, the greater your loyalty to that god, especially sort of in Greek days and ancient Greece and things like that. Yeah, fair enough. And I think that list is very comparable to the current White House administration, quite frankly. It's There's an Epstein list somewhere that we can bust out if we do need to reinstate the practice.
Yeah, we've got options.
Yep.
That's not the world that the Bible describes.
I agree. I think it depends how you're reading it, right? If you're reading it as a Christian, of course, that's how you're going to read it. What I'm saying is it's too simplistic an approach. I'm demonstrating the simplicity in my very own approach there.
Okay.
So where we've got to is that you're just aware here, Alex, that there's a number of different factors that might go into the emergence of the values we have around kindness and compassion in today's world. And you're not in any way dismissing the fact that Christianity was an important motivator in it.
So I just want to point out that the moderator is taking a moment to redirect the debate from the minutia of what the religion says to the vibes of some general feels that people think about when they think about Christianity.
Well, I think that Glenn, his point is that, so Alex is trying to sort of narrow it down to, well, if you want to claim that the values came from Christianity, where do those values come from? It's either the book or the church, the religion itself, right? Like, so the organized religion, because those are the things in history that basically passed on their values to people. Essentially, they either had, like in the case of Catholics, they listened to the priests, but in the case of Protestants, you have sola scriptura, you would read the book, right? So it's either the church or the book kind of thing. And that is a good point. So he's attacking both of those. Well, he doesn't really need to attack the church. Glenn is quite aware of how bad it has been from the actions of the church kind of thing. Glenn's very aware of that. So he's really attacking the book. But I think Glenn is sort of trying to say, well, it's sort of these modern Christendom values that the God believers have, that they like to say they have, that is responsible for Western values. But the question Alex should be asking is, well, if those values differ than what's in the book and the values the church has portrayed, where did they get those values from?
It's the religion.
Well, if Glenn was smart, he would say, hey, it's the Holy Spirit or the nature of God or some, thingo. I don't think that's pretty... Well, I think personally that it's more from society developing morality, quite frankly.
Yeah, demonstrably.
Just the natural progression. Yeah.
My follow-up is, if these values are from Christianity, why don't we see the same values everywhere there's Christianity? Like Ethiopia, for instance.
Sure.
Where they have very different cultural traditions, but they've been Christian longer than most of Europe.
Yeah. I mean, Ghana is very Christian as well. Yeah, so I but he could always appeal to some ephemeral Holy Spirit or some ephemeral sort of conscience of the, because like the Jordan Peterson route where he sort of says that God is your conscience kind of thing. It's kind of really weird and really strange, but sort of say that the values come from there. You liked the stream? Oh, thank you, Kip.
It's good advice for everyone.
Yeah, hit a thumbs up. I bet you can't. See, I'm using reverse psychology now. See what I've been reduced to?
I blame Jordan Peterson.
Oh, you know what? I just realized I haven't liked the stream. I feel really bad now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I am liking the stream though. Don't get me wrong. The buttons on the internet don't necessarily represent my values and enjoyment of this stream.
We just haven't been moved by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Now that I've been moved by my Holy Spirits, I will hit this button right now. I'm sorry. Okay. I didn't realize. You haven't been watching a stream. You're like, this is great. I'm glad I liked it. And then you realize you didn't like the stream at all. Don't be that person. Don't be that person.
Oh yeah. It happens. It's fine.
It does. I get you.
Many a day have I been in a stream just chilling, and then a mod comes through and is like, hey, have you pushed the damn button yet? And I'm like, oh, I haven't pushed the damn button yet. Thank you for reminding me. because it just zoop, it doesn't occur to everybody. What also doesn't occur to everybody, but does occur for members, because members have special buttons, is the member thing. Members, among other things, get a free super chat every month, a member super chat, if you will. And this is Sapphire's 8th month. Thank you so much, Sapphire, or congratulations, as the case may be. And Sapphire is using it to hit us with emojis, which are the lesbian flag and the boobies, over and over,
Nice.
as one does. Sapphire requested the lesbian flag, so that's which is valid.
Why not? Why not? Look, if you need another one, I will happily give up my emoji. I definitely will. I'm more than happy to sacrifice. That will be my sacrifice. Instead of my child, I will sacrifice my emoji. Yeah.
No, you're quite safe. We have several others in line ahead, including the most recent, which is just a blue giant star, because the emoji slot opened and I needed to stick something in it in case a bunch of people. So yeah, it's a placeholder. But hey, a blue giant star is still pretty cool. Also pretty cool, the human Tommy, who's been a member for 2 months. Hell yeah. Thank you, Tommy. Tommy, after a fashion, also kind of has an emoji, because Tommy is the reason I created the Ally Space Pride flag. And once Tommy hung it on his wall, I happened to notice the A shape on the flag, when hung vertically, looks like a greater than symbol. And so now we have a greater than symbol emoji made out of space.
Nice.
Like so. I mean, you can't see it in the StreamYard, but it's in the side chat. Oh goodness. Oof. Oh my, oh my. And Left-Handed Jedi is here to remind us that Beetlejuice, the star, not the movie character, is very slowly wandering its way towards a supernova. Yeah. It may already have gone, because it's, several light years away. And
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think of that. Because light takes time to travel to us, it may be over for Beetlejuice, and we'll find out about it later. But a perfectly designed universe, by the way, just saying.
For sure.
Absolutely perfectly designed.
No one is good at math tonight. This is why we need Kip here to help us with the math.
In various aspects, but you're questioning this whole idea that it's too simple to say it just came out of the Bible. The Bible is a very complex.
Not just that, but also that, like, we talk about compassion, and compassion is such an ambiguous term that, by the way, obviously does crop up in other traditions, to the extent that if you're just talking about compassion, you can't be talking about something which is uniquely indebted to Christianity. The thesis is more specific than that. It says that our modern sort of conception of Western values comes from Christianity. So I don't just want to know where compassion, in fact, if I were just to grant that, okay, this idea of compassion, maybe even...
Right, because compassion isn't a Western value. It's a human, it's not even a value. It's a human thing, So you can't say that's a Western value. That's like, well, to borrow from Glenn, it's like saying breathing air is a Western value. No, all humans do that. All of us.
Right.
What do you mean?
And we know the mechanics of compassion, like it's related to empathy. Empathy, we know, is mirror neurons firing when you see somebody in some emotional state. Like we kind of understand the neurology of why we feel for people when they are in a heightened emotional state. Like, we understand that. It's not some Holy Spirit moving inside of you. The research says it's a function of neurology among social animals, and we're not the only ones to do it, by the way.
It's true.
Right? Like, I think last segment I brought up that experiment with the parrots, where they were basically getting parrots to, like, do work in exchange for tokens, for money that they could exchange for food. And when one parrot got money and the other didn't, the parrot with the money passed tokens to the other bird so it could eat. Like, we see this in all kinds of animals. It's not just humans.
Imagine that. vicious ancient dinosaurs caring for each other.
Oh, couldn't be.
Yeah, never would have expected. I think our chat has solved the mystery of why Alex is shilling for apologists now. Where Kip is pointing out the mustache, and Tommy is mentioning that he used to have the beard. Clearly,
Right.
our Alex O'Connor has been replaced by the Mirror Universe Alex
Ooh.
O'Connor.
The evil Nega O'Connor, as it were. Nega Alex? I don't know what to call him.
from the Terran Empire.
Yeah. No, you could be right. I think you're onto something.
Maybe.
The idea that all human beings have the Imago Dei and they've all got worth for that reason, and that's what gives us this, antithesis to exposure and that kind of stuff. We're talking about Western values, right? And when you say Western values to somebody, and you say, well, what are the principal values of the West? If you were to ask a scholar or you to ask someone on the street, what defines Western values, you think? Do you think that they would say compassion, consent? Maybe they say equality, but I think they say things like this. And I wonder if, in listing some of these things,
Well,
you can
pause
think
it
or
for a
perhaps
sec.
provide. And
What would you think that Western values are?
It's an interesting question. I don't know, because I'm so antithetical to the concept there is such a thing as Western values.
Right. Well,
But
I think that
enlightenment is what comes to my mind.
well, I don't think it's a real thing, right? I think it's purely conceptual. And I get you. Like, it's not really a real thing, but I think I do say, well, there are Western values and they might share a lot with the rest of the world. But I think that there are concepts that the sort of Western, because I mean, even Western countries are more just ones that are allied with the European sort of history of European empires and the United States kind of thing, right? Like, that's really what Western is. I mean, if you look at it's got nothing to do with geography, because Australia's a Western country, or called a Western country, but it's definitely not west of that sort of European imaginary point that they're talking about between the West and the East, which sort of seems to flow down, from Berlin, basically, when it was the East and the West and Berlin, right? Like, so Russia would be sort of an Eastern country, but Western values, don't get me wrong, I think it is just conceptual and not a real thing, and it's just a sort of social construct when people are talking about it. But that doesn't mean you can't define it, right? As sort of these values are sort of values that Western countries, and the Western countries are simply these politically sort of set up things. You can define that, right? Like, you can say, hey, these are the values, but I would equate them to more like sort of classical liberalism values, freedom of speech, universal suffrage, freedom of religion, freedom of all of these things that it doesn't seem to have a lot in common with Christianity. When I go through, like, freedom of religion with Christianity, there's no freedom of religion in Christianity. People who are Christian, Alex No Connor, but that is awesome. Okay. Comment of the day, as far as I'm concerned. Well done, Saf. Comment of the day.
Oh, goodness. So the religious freedom is a big one. Secularism, which is a Greek tradition. They came up with secularism but whatever.
Right.
Clearly not a Christian value,
Right.
Like, it's contradictory with the idea of theocracy. But also so many of the other things. Like, I did a Google, what do people mean when they say Western values? And I got back an overview of individual human rights, which is not Christian. It's very not Christian.
Right.
The rule of law over ecumenical tradition, very not Christian. Religious
Very not,
freedom,
yeah.
rationalism and scientific inquiry,
Yeah.
very anti-Christian.
Yeah, I was going to
And,
say empiricism, to be honest with you. Empiricism is a
Yeah.
very Western value. Yeah, yeah.
and capitalism, which is maybe not anti-Christian, but it's anti-Jesus. And what's more interesting, because Jesus with the money changers and all that crap, you feed the poor and all of that, very not Jesus. But also there's some flaws, like the inconsistencies with claiming some of these values as Western values, because you've got colonialism and slavery and even today systemic inequality. So the Western values don't exist even in the West. It's just bullshit exceptionalism. That's all it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so. I think there is a tendency to have tribalism, right? Like these values are important within our society, but outside we don't give a shit, right? Like we don't care about the individual rights of people outside of our countries. And I get you, like that sort of American exceptionalism of America first that's currently pervading the right at the moment. I totally understand. Yes, that is not, but I don't think that's a Western value. I think that is something that's been sort of slapped on top. And you're right. There's definitely some problems with upholding these values we claim, but that doesn't mean we don't claim that those values are important. I think we've got to distinguish between the political structure and the overarching zeitgeist of countries, right? Because the overarching zeitgeist of America is that freedom of speech is important, individual rights are important, upholding the law is important, but that isn't what the political climate is in the country, right? Like not for a long time. But that doesn't mean that the overall opinion of the people is not that, right? A failure of the political system doesn't mean that those aren't values the people hold.
Sure, like I'm thinking of Revolution France. The government failed, and then the people overcorrected in the name of values.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So, adventures and things, but apparently there was cake. Or something. I don't know. That's a little far afield even for me, but I don't need a reign of terror. Thank you.
Listening at home can think of what might be a biblical or church tradition grounding for any of these things. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom for free sexual encounter between any two consenting adults. Free market capitalism is really important to the development of the West. The military and colonialism, nationalism. These are the kinds of things which I think actually define the West of the past few hundred years. And I don't think any of them have a grounding, let alone a unique grounding in Christian principles.
Oh, goodness. I mean, those...
Well played. Like, none of these are uniquely Christian or even Christian.
Yes. In fact, a couple of them, Christianity is antithetical to freedom of religion.
Yeah, your ball, Glenn. And also, Sapphire reminding us the cake is in fact a lie.
The cake is a lie.
It is known. Jonathan Davis. No, not John. Jesus Christ. Why do I keep saying that? Jonathan Davis is the lead singer from Korn. Jonathan. Fuck. He used to be on an NPR show that was amazing. And now I can't remember his name. His last name. It's fine. I'll get over it.
What did he do? What
he wrote the song. Well, he wrote the whole soundtrack for Portal.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, I love the ending song. Portal.
So
I played that one night when I didn't know what to do, and it was like encapsulated the best short little encapsulated game I've ever played. Like just beautiful, just gorgeous.
I still haven't actually finished the damn thing, at least the campaign mode. Eventually I'll get to it. Yeah, Jonathan Colton. I'm not completely silly. Yeah, he's done a surprising amount of stuff. Even though he was on whatever the fuck that NPR show was. Not Wait, Don't Tell Me, the other one that was like comedy, improv, news, current events type. I can't remember anything today. It's fine.
The first 5 things you mentioned are unthinkable without having come through centuries and centuries of Christianization. Was freedom of speech the first thing you sort of mentioned? I mean, that was absolutely hammered out in Protestant Catholic disputes. John Milton coming very strongly for freedom of speech, and then from dissenters from the Church of England wanting to have the freedom to be able to express their own views, and eventually sailing across to America and there you see some profoundly Christian history behind why does America have a First Amendment that the United Kingdom does not.
That's not exactly Christian history. And also in invoking, I don't know if he was gesturing at the Pilgrims, because religious people sailing across to America, that did happen, but it was more people sailing across to America, and they brought their religion with them, with the exception of the Puritans, who did so precisely for the opposite reason of Western values. They were very, very vexed with the secularism and religious freedom of the Western countries, and they wanted to be considerably more pure about it.
I was going to say murderous, but yeah, pure about it is fun.
Yeah.
I sort of thought this freedom of speech is older, and as it turns out, I mean, do take this with a grain of salt. It is sort of the AI overview that's popped up here, but apparently ancient Athenian democratic. So if you know ancient Greece, it wasn't one country, it was a number of city-states. But in Athens, there was something known as parrhesia in the 5th and 6th century, uninhibited speech. So yeah, maybe that is an influence on things, because hey, if you're going to be a philosopher, you've really got to be able to speak uninhibited. I guess you could argue that Socrates was killed for influencing the youth and stuff, but I think it's a lot more complex than that.
I mean, it certainly is likely to be, but it does make sense that in a democracy, there'd be less impetus to make it illegal to speak ill of the king because there isn't a king, Maybe.
Maybe.
I try to pick up what I can from the ancient Greeks, but I am by no means an expert. Not even in the same neighborhood.
No, I'm an expert on nothing. Like, quite frankly, I just
It's the sort of question that you cannot answer without consulting Christian history and Christians doing things that they certainly interpreted them as acting for Christian purposes.
I mean, cool. You can take credit for certain things to a greater or lesser extent. You can say, well, Christians contributed to this, but you can't point to any single thing and say that is Christian. Without Christianity, that would have never happened.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to move us on to equality, which I feel is kind of part and parcel. Okay, I think it's worth pointing out. I guess briefly, I would consider that in the same way that you might use something like the abolitionist movement, which you will see as sort of, which we'll get onto shortly, I'm sure, but like sort of emerging in a Christian culture, like fine. But there are sort of two theses here. It's either that you've got this sort of Christian worldview which exists as the biblical stories from which it grew, and then the early Catholic Church, and then you've got the Protestants coming along, and you've either got this story of like a flourishing of Christian values into freedom of speech, or you've got this story of a kind of disintegration from this original idea that you certainly don't get ideas of like freedom of thought and freedom of religion and freedom of speech from the Bible, but you can be put to death for believing, for worshipping the wrong thing, right? We definitely cannot ground in the Bible the idea of freedom of speech.
In theology, the difference
or in the church, rip the Marcionites and all the other heretical groups.
Between speech and violence. Like on a naturalistic worldview, is there a great difference between speech and violence? Whereas on a theological view, like the idea that Jesus says, "Put away your sword, for those who live by the sword will die by the sword," and then the only sword he gives to the church is the sword of the Spirit, a spiritual sword. What is that? It's the Word of God.
Yes.
And then the idea of missionary encounter all throughout medieval Europe was to go armed with persuasion. Yes, yeah. You write about that in the book as well, right? I think that is part of the intellectual genealogy. What I'm trying to explain.
Are the Crusades part of the intellectual genealogy? Are the witch trials, the Malleus Maleficarum? Is that part of?
Yeah, and I had something related, like, basically sexual equality, like the idea, or gender equality, the idea that women are equal to men. That is definitely didn't come from Christians, and it definitely is a Western value. Like I would say that is absolutely a Western value, that we uphold, that women are equal to men in not as individuals, but I mean for political rights, before some right-wing chud misquotes me. That freedom, independence, value in society is equal to men, and that is definitely not a Christian value. You can't say that the Christians were at the tip of the spear of the suffrage movement. Like it really was, priests and stuff saying that women should know their place, and they belong in the household. Hell, you still have Christians today saying that women should know their place and belong in the household, kind of thing. You get them today
on Christianity, like they have no other basis for it. They're like, well, the Bible says.
Yep.
Here is that I see sort of two stories here, right? Like, if freedom of religion, as we sort of consider it today, is essentially a Christian idea, which I find extremely strange reading the Bible in particular, then it would make sense that it sort of develops over the history of the church. But if freedom of religion is actually a sort of a principle which is asserted against the Christian tradition, we would also expect it to come as sort of at the, like, somewhere in the story of going from a sort of a fledgling Jesus movement into an early church, into a Protestant Reformation, and then as people begin to sort of wane on the authority of Christianity, they then start establishing these principles for themselves. And I think you've described exactly how these things did come about. People sort of began to realize that their own interests weren't being served by the church. And
that's an interesting take. Western values are shaped by Christianity insofar as their opposition to Christianity.
Yes, and I would agree with that. I think freedom of religion was a sort of as a philosophical movement during the Enlightenment, was created as a way to oppose the homogeny of the Catholic Church, right? Like, because don't forget, the Enlightenment and the French Revolution was all about the Catholic Church. It was it worked with the aristocracy at that point. Like, it was kings rule by divine right. Know your place, peasant. God put you there. Who are you to say you deserve anything better?
Yeah. You were born into squalor. That's where God has decided you should be, or something.
The Protestants, and they decided we want to be able to assert our own views here. Same thing happens in America, where there's disputes between churches and state, and Jefferson famously writing about the disputes that they have, and these are put in place, these protections, as much to protect the church as to protect the people who are sort of trying to not attend that church. But like, I think what we're seeing here is a sort of disintegration and an assertion of your own sort of self-interest, essentially.
I mean, if I were to try to summarize this, Ali, is it that you're concerned that Glen is passing off as quote-unquote Christian, things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, not because it's tied inherently to the biblical witness, but because the circumstances that happened historically around the church led to people developing these ideas, not necessarily because they somehow find their seed in...
Especially, I know that Glen has a lot to say about the concept of rights, and it's true that you get sort of talk of rights and conceptions of rights dating sort of back to sort of the 11th, 12th centuries, maybe even prior to that. But clearly the kinds of rights as are embedded into the Western framework today start to emerge.
Let's talk about
this, because
this is where I wanted to go.
And I think that those rights are an assertion of self-interest. They're not a flourishing of religious tradition. I think that they are essentially a result of conflict that people are trying to protect against.
We will come back to that. We'll put a pin in that and come back to it, because I think this neatly moves us into the next area I was hoping to kind of get into, which is equality, another key value that Glen, you say, has its foundations in the Christian story. Obviously, you're...
Cool. Tell me about equality in the Christian story. Yeah. I would seriously love to hear that.
Well, I mean, he can go to Jesus and, blessed are the meek, blessed are, poor, and, take care of people and all of that kind of stuff. but it was still over the overarching thing of, well, there is only one God, the God your creator. You can't, if you don't worship the God, then you're going to hell to be, it comes with all of that baggage. So I think Alex is fantastic. He has hit on one thing that he cannot possibly claim Christianity endorses, and that's freedom of religion. Like, you cannot in any way claim that freedom of religion came out of the Catholic Church unless it is to oppose it. And then its origin isn't the Catholic Church or the church, any church in general. Then its origin is coming from society as a response to the church having too much power to tell people, yeah, if you don't worship, you're in trouble, matey. It's just absurd that Glen's trying to argue that freedom of religion came from Christianity. It's absurd. I'm sorry, it is.
View is, and perhaps you can elucidate some of this now, but obviously that was worked through by theologians and the church and into what we might call a modern Declaration of Human Rights or whatever it might be, but that somehow that was unthinkable, as you say, without the Christian story that ultimately gave rise to it. Alex, I think we're going to hear why he feels that's a stretch too far, but make the case first for equality as a fundamentally Christian idea.
Yuval Noah Harari makes the arguments that equality is a fundamentally biblical idea generated from a belief in God and souls. But he then goes on to say, but if we no longer believe in God and souls, then what do we do with this idea of equality? So I think that the thesis that Christianity has shaped our moral intuitions is made from lots of different directions. There are people who think Christianity has shaped our Western values, and it's not a good thing. I think Tom Holland, for instance, is the sort of person who thinks, oh gosh, I do believe in the human rights thing, and I now see the dependence upon the Christian thing, and if I might as well be hung for a sheep as for a lamb, and so I'm going to dive into the Christian thing. Now, that leaves me with the job of, is there a link between Christian faith and equality? Declaration of Independence. So in June of 1776, Thomas Jefferson writes the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be
Sacred,
except
and undeniable.
Yeah, sacred and undeniable.
What was that an edit?
No, that's the original version of the Declaration of Independence. Like, it was next edits were like, we find these truths to be self-evident, and that's the one you're familiar with. But originally it was like, we find these truths to be sacred.
Okay, I was just wondering. I was talking about like the cutaways where like Glen would like stop abruptly and then Alex would say the thing, and I'm like, what's happening here? But yeah, also
Thomas Jefferson was a deist, if I remember correctly, and it kind of like, because don't forget, you cannot like sort of look at the American independence from England without looking at the French Revolution, right? Like, you can't, like, they were so influenced by it. And there was a lot of deists during the French Revolution, not necessarily for the better kind of thing. I don't know. I think that they are so intertwined because they were so influenced by what was going on in France at the time.
I think Jefferson was a little before the French Revolution, but that's one of the reasons that we have a Statue of Liberty, is because the French claimed our revolution was inspiration for theirs. But
okay. I thought the French started before. Okay, I could be wrong.
Well, there was a lot happening at the tail end of the 18th century. I've personally made the argument that that was the First World War of the United States, and our public schools like to make it out like the American Revolution was the only thing going on at the time. Right. But in fact, the only reason we were able to fight off the British is because the British were occupied across most of Africa and Southeast Asia and a few other places, dealing with both the French and the Spanish. The entire planet was embroiled in this war between these three colonial powers.
Right. Well, I think that sort of this overthrow of the monarchy that was backed by the church. It was all happening, you know, it's all part of the Enlightenment. It's all happening at sort of the same time kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you absolutely could be right though. Like I said, I don't know anything. I don't know anything.
We just work here.
Yeah, I just work here. I just say stuff.
Well, exactly, sacred and undeniable. So he sent that.
That's the first draft.
That's the first draft. He sent that out. Benjamin Franklin put 6 lines through, sacred and undeniable, and just says self-evident. And I think that's a perfect description for the ways in which we have moved from an explicitly Christian understanding of something like equality or rights, and moved towards a purported rational basis for these things, which I think has smuggled in what are properly Christian ideas under a kind of an Enlightenment secular humanist.
I mean, the self-evident decision by Franklin to put self-evident instead of sacred is essentially that move to the air we breathe. It's, oh, of course it's self-evident because this is the air we breathe. Why would we ever have to imagine that this has a supernatural basis? But you're saying it did have a supernatural basis.
Well, I mean, he didn't edit out that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, Thomas Jefferson...
The Creator wasn't in Jefferson's original draft.
Is that right?
That's right. He does say created, but he doesn't say creator, which is kind
Creator. So who added Creator? So
of... It was Congress or something. I can't remember who it was who did.
Now they're tangenting.
Yeah.
And for me to criticize anybody for tangents, but I do have to...
I think they were really influenced by John Locke, right? So John Locke was the first person to pen the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Like that was basically, you know, I've had this argument with a Christian that he was saying, oh, you know, they got that from the Bible, you know, and it's sort of from the Bible, life, liberty, and pursuit of it. And it's like, why would we think it's from the Bible when John Locke, which we knew that the founding fathers were reading, penned that exact sentiment? Why do we have to go to these vague passages from the Bible about, you know, all men are free under God, and, you know, all of this kind of stuff, and try and interpret it when we have like that exact sentiment coming from a philosopher in France that we knew that the founding fathers were reading at the time? You know, like why would we think it's from the Bible at that point? But John Locke was a deist. He thought that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were given as sort of this natural rights, these sacred natural rights kind of thing. So it's hardly surprising that the founding fathers sort of had the same sentiment, right? That these truths are, you know, Benjamin Franklin, obviously he's more atheistic. He's like, well, they're self-evident rather than sacred natural rights given by, you know, presumably a God, just not the Christian God, right? So even if you're going to life, liberty, and happiness as some sacred value given by a God, the people that penned it, they weren't talking about the Christian God. They weren't talking about Jesus. They were deists, right? So they saw God as some sort of, not abstract, but some impersonal force that did all of this stuff and created everything and set the laws and rules for the universe or for reality, and then sort of pieced out. You know, like they were appealing to a God setting that people had God-given rights, and then went, yeah, now take care of yourselves. I'm not interfering anymore, which is the deist position.
Right.
So
in the Declaration of Independence, I just had to look it up to be sure I had it correct, but it's also in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson uses the term nature's God in reference to other writings which describe his idea of a creator who is knowable through reason and natural law rather than magic and revelation.
Right. So this is the deist God, right? Like this is deism 101, that there's only natural things around us, and that's evidence of a sort of removed, impersonal, if you will, sort of, you know, deist God that has organized the universe in a logical, rational way, and you can know that through the logical. Now, I don't believe in deism, of course. I'm an atheist, but to claim that for Christianity is, you know, it's a bit worrying, because they weren't, you know, it wasn't a Christian that did that. It was a deist.
It's like saying any document where you see the word God on it, it must be in reference to the Christian God. Tell that to the Hindus, you know? No, that's not how that works.
But this is the and we've talked about this many times. Ember and I have really discussed this Mott and Bailey with the God of the Bible and the God of classical theism kind of thing, the Christian God, Jesus God as people portray it, and the sort of more vague any God whatsoever that could possibly exist anywhere in the universe in any form, sort of even kind of metaphorically. You know, if you're talking about Christianity, you can't just claim any God whatsoever, right? Like, because Christianity is based upon the teachings and following of Jesus Christ who rose from the dead. Like, the two things are not the same. If you're appealing to some deist God who started the universe and created the rules of the universe and natural laws, and then just went, yeah, peace out, I'm gone. That is not the Christian God, and that's not Christianity. You've got to be specific about definitions here. And too often, you know, Christians will go, well, I've proved God because I've appealed to some nebulous deist idea of a God that created natural laws. That doesn't get you to Christianity.
Like, my goodness, I remember the first time going through William Lane Craig's 5 arguments. None of his arguments, except for the burning in the bosom, have anything to do with his God. They're just a something that we could call a God, maybe.
Yeah. There was a secularizing and a more
remember that bit of
religifying.
Hamilton, but I don't. Anyway,
But okay, so I mean, Jefferson is getting this language from John Locke, who is arguing right back from Genesis chapter 1 and from the image of God, Genesis 1 and 2, from the image of God. The Enlightenment thinkers were originally much more explicitly Christian than they ended up being, and you see in that process from John Locke, who is just explicitly biblical in his framing of human rights coming from a biblical understanding, of the image of God. From Locke to Jefferson to Franklin to today, when we all just kind of assume that, these things are self-evident. And yet, I would say the one thing that's self-evident about rights is that they're not self-evident. And if they were, they would be much more widespread in human civilizations around the world. This is why Tom Holland, in his book, says, the ultimate seedbed of the American Revolution was, no matter what some of its framers might have thought, the book of Genesis. An Old Testament book, right? A book that I think we're very glad exists and that has been at the heart of the rights revolution.
When you talk about the book of Genesis, are you really just talking about chapter 1, verse 27? Or is there anything else in Genesis that you think is relevant here?
Well, the entire creation narrative is a radically different narrative to either the religious ancient Near Eastern conception of the day.
Specifically, what is it that uniquely contributes towards this?
What the creation narrative is a copy paste of every other Near Eastern creation narrative. The fuck is he talking about? Tom says Genesis 1 and 2, 127, whatever the fuck. So it's Judaism, not Christianity, because you don't need Christianity to have Genesis, because that's in Judaism. Wild. Well, maybe he'll explain.
Flourishing in the Enlightenment from Genesis.
That we are made A, in God's image, and B, to have dominion. And so both those things.
Nothing says liberty like we're made in God's image and something dominion, which again, there's squibbling, there's squabbling, there's bickering, there's biting about that. It's I realize a lot of people prefer dominion, but
yeah, no, he's right. Like, Locke was a Christian. He was apparently he began in Calvinist Trinitarianism, but apparently towards the end of his life he returned to an Arian tradition, which is sort of the idea that there is no Trinity, and Jesus is different person than or a different being than God, kind of thing. So, which is apparently a massive blasphemy. But yeah, I see. The problem is that when you say, does Christianity support Locke's views, the Catholic Church, which was Christendom at the time, definitely didn't support his view. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. The question is, was John Locke indicative of Christianity at the time? And I don't think he was.
Well, and that gets kind of philosophical in its own right. Like, does the beliefs of one Christian represent Christianity, or does Christianity represent the beliefs of a Christian? Because you run into the composition division thing, but also by the same token, like, most people would call me an American, and so they would, if they'd never met an American, then what I say and do would represent to them the way Americans say and do things.
Yeah.
I don't know, but again, that's philosophical.
Are important in terms of our inherent worth and dignity, and in terms of the fact that God did not make us to be slaves, but made us to rule, which...
I'm so glad you said that, Glenn, because that is a brilliant counterpoint to your own point, that according to Christianity, rather than Judaism, according to Paul, rather than Moses, everyone is a slave. Yeah. Whether we're slaves or masters or whatever, and that is the role that God created us for. But even the masters are slaves to God. There is no freedom in Christianity. Everyone is a slave. So thanks for that, Glenn. Very well done.
Yeah, and it's wild to meet people that are happy to be slaves. They're like, oh, I'm a slave to God and proud of it. And it's like, wow, okay, that's wild.
Yeah, how can, as Glenn just said, dominion is antithetical to slavery. If your religion demands that you are a slave, then you cannot have dominion. Period.
Well, you can't have dominion except for dominion that has been granted to you by your master.
I don't think that counts as dominion. That's like you're a middle manager.
Well, that's true. Yeah. So you might have authority, but no actual dominion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get you. No, you're probably right. Yeah, you're right.
At least that's the way I take it. But maybe we're splitting hairs on words or
maybe, something. But people being completely subservient and owned by God is absolutely a thing. Like we are slaves to God in the Christian tradition, because if God wants to destroy us, that he has entirely a right to do so. Like there is no, like we have no rights as far as God is concerned, right? Like God can do anything he wants to and nothing, and it's all moral. It's all fine because he has complete authority over us. If that's not slavery, then I don't understand what slavery is.
Was very important in abolitionism, which we might get to. There's a lot to say. You track this back to John Locke, for example. What were we just talking about? What did Locke think about atheists? He thought that they couldn't be trusted. He thought that you couldn't make like legally sort of binding agreements with them. He thought like so much for freedom of religion, right? Like that certainly
is that a bad thing, or you're stating that as it's?
I'm saying that like we were discussing a moment ago, this concept of freedom of religion as a flourishing of these ideas, and that obviously didn't apply to John Locke. Of course, by the time you get to the American Revolution, you have men in a room writing these declarations and these constitutions who at least themselves did not see themselves as engaged in a Christian project. Jefferson is famously not a Christian. He's famously anti-Christian.
Yeah, him and Franklin were the two least Christian men.
Gouverneur Morris is the same. The man who wrote the words. He also put a pen, but this time to the Constitution, which is the actually legally binding one, which originally opened, we the people of New Hampshire, New York, and so on. And he put a line through it and said, "We the people of the United States of America." And he was once asked what he thought the hand of God was in forming this miraculous Constitution, and he said it was the work of plain, honest men. He didn't recognize such a thing. Perhaps the most important.
Well, honest is put an asterisk next to that one. But yeah, it was a communal effort.
Yeah. Well, what was considered honest for their time, I guess, is what you would say. I mean, they were like, again, we can't do presentism to say, hey, they, did this and that, and it's reprehensible, so they are bad people. Unfortunately, people are a product of their time. Their sensibilities do move with the culture. So when examining history, we can't just say, hey, because you don't live up to our visions of morality, you are a bad person necessarily. Anybody excusing their behavior today, like sort of saying, hey, that was fine, yeah, that's a problem. But we can't say they should have known better, because if they knew better, or if they should have known better, they probably would do something differently. If they had been educated in your time, they would probably do something differently.
Possibly. I mean, a lot of the ideas that we come up with, I mean, hell, some of the ideas that you and I come up with on the show are in direct response to the stimuli we're exposed to, the things we're reviewing on the show. And
Right.
so, yeah, a big part of, at least maybe not a person's character, but the things that a person does, specifically the ideas, but also the things they enact, are often the response of the stimuli they encounter in their lives. And so if you live in a
Sure.
different time, you're going to get different results.
Right.
Yeah.
Important founding father might have been Thomas Paine, because Thomas Paine is the one who got this whole thing going in the first place. A lot of people didn't really want revolution. They just wanted proper representation in Parliament if they were going to be American subjects of a British rule. But Thomas Paine is the one who convinced everybody that actually we need revolution. We need to assert our rights. And we know that Thomas Paine was not a friend of Christianity. He writes thoroughly against Christianity to the extent that he had to live in exile. And then when he finally died, his bones were lost, and no one wanted to come to his funeral.
He was once asked what his philosophy was. It was to act justly, love mercy, and work for human flourishing, right? And you'll recognize that, act justly, love mercy is Micah chapter 6. And then he adds the sort of the humanistic loss to it. I think that's another perfect example of some profoundly Christian ideas that have just been...
But these men at least saw themselves as working contra Christianity.
Yeah, he's just like, this man had an idea. It's clearly a Christian idea because I said so.
But that's like taking one thing out of Christianity that is not like, and I think that Alex should go back to saying mercy is not unique to Christianity, right? Like tons of civilizations have shown mercy kind of thing over the years. Like mercy is not hey, that is a unique Christian thing to show mercy to your enemies. The Emperor of China shows mercy to subjects. It shows mercy. Like mercy is not this, well, only Christians have shown mercy to people in the history of the reality. No. Like you can't just claim mercy as Christian.
Yeah, if that were true, but I mean, it's not only is it not uniquely Christian, but it's true the other way. Christians have not shown mercy. I point to the Crusades and the witch hunts and so forth.
The Cathars.
Yeah.
Like the Cathars is one I keep bringing up, and the reason why I keep bringing it up is that one of the major disagreements they had with the church was the way that they treated women. Like they basically had that women are equal to men and could lead things and stuff like that, and the church did not like that.
The church was not a fan of a lot of things.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting.
But it gets ludicrous to people going, well, why didn't atheists create all these hospitals, and why didn't atheists create all these these wonderful works of art and things like that? It's like you couldn't be an atheist back in those times.
Yeah, you will be murdered. But we don't talk about Bruno.
We do talk about Bruno constantly. The church doesn't talk about Bruno.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really need to get that clip back. Oh, I miss my old clips.
Kind of seeing themselves. And you could say that maybe you have a better sort of grasp of their psychological motivations than they do, but I think
when they say rights, they are showing us the intellectual genealogy, and it runs right through the heart of Christendom.
Yeah, because I want to talk about rights, but that's kind of I suppose it's a separate subject, because we're talking about equality here, right? And when I hear the word equality, I'm thinking equality between whom? Like, in what context does equality come out? They come up in things like racial.
Yeah, who is equal? Who are we talking? Because are we talking about, again, with the Paul thing, with the no slave nor free because everyone is a slave before the Lord, or are we talking the women shall be silent? Like which Paul are we referencing here, or someone who's not Paul?
And I mean, you know, even the language of all men are created equal kind of thing, that they were talking about men, not women, right? Like there really was well, men are definitely the ones in. There was definitely a patriarchy at work, even during those days, where, I mean, if you go back to the Old Testament, women were commodities.
In many cases, that's still true.
Yeah, definitely can be. You know, and it's interesting that he wants to claim that, you know, equality. I mean, it states clearly in the New Testament that the man is the head of the household, just as Jesus is the head of the church, right? Like it makes it absolutely clear that in any family, the man is the one in charge. There's no disambiguation there. There's no, you know, that passage is very clear.
In a way, it's also sort of a necrocracy. And speaking of dead people, I think I did find the clip.
Oh. I don't know. I'm so confused.
It's from the movie Encanto. That's why I keep saying it's a reference to that every time Bruno comes up. So Bruno, for anybody who only knows the movie, Bruno was a scientist around the same time as Galileo, who got burned at the stake for saying that the Earth goes around the sun because you can see it.
Yeah.
There's evidence of it.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Heretic! You must burn, so no one else will spread your demonstrably provable lies."
Yes, because they were sort of like, the Bible says that the earth was created first and then the sun was set into the sky of the earth. So therefore heresy. And it's kind of, it's uncannily similar to what we see today, where it's like, well, no, God created the earth, so it can't be, you know, 4 point whatever billion years old and must only be 10,000 years old. You know, like this kind of, well, ignore the evidence, read the book.
Which is, they still do. Even though they've backed down on a lot of things, like the sun going around the earth and the shape of the earth and the flavonoids, as you might say. But they still do that with other things.
Yep.
Discrimination. Yeah. They come up with things like gender discrimination. And there's
Jefferson held 600 slaves as he wrote that.
There is absolutely no way that you can look at the Bible or the history of the church and think that there is, I think, even an embryo, the idea of something like our modern conception of gender equality that's indebted to a feminist movement. So people of Tom Holland's ilk like to say that the feminist movement is essentially Christian in origin, and I think that the justification for such a view is essentially roundabout. So why don't we focus in? Most people today, when you ask them, do you think that men and women are equal? They don't just say they both have equal worth in the sense that neither should be killed. They don't just say that they have equal worth and that, you know, if you have a child, you shouldn't, you know, abort one just because it's a woman. They say that there's a sort of equal societal standing of men and women. And I'm wondering if you can identify where in the Christian tradition that comes from.
What they want to also say is difference, right? And the culture wars that are tearing us apart are, how do we affirm both the difference of male and female and their ontological equality?
It depends what you consider to be like the Western position on the equality of women.
And he's kind of, I don't know if he's just deliberately confusing or if he is confused about this, but it seems like in his own head, there's this problem telling the difference between the personhood of a person and the physicality of the person's body, you know, because like a person in a wheelchair is not physically able to do certain things, and no one is denying that, but they're still a person.
Right, and they have equal societal standing to me or you or anybody else. That's all that we're talking about, and that's what we're talking about, equality. And I think Alex is quite right to point it out, but it sounds like he's going to go down a route of, well, women aren't equal to men, and that's sort of letting the mask slip a bit. Because, hi Maya, when we're talking about societal standing, we're sort of talking about the equal right to vote, the equal right to free speech, the equal right to bodily autonomy, the equal right to all of the things that we have given to other, because it used to be that if you needed to vote, and the human Tommy pointed this out, like if it was only landowners, you had to own land in order to vote, right? Like, so we've sort of said, well, now all men can vote, kind of thing. All white men can vote, and said, well, they're the ones, But I think that modern Western values, one of those values is everybody has a right to, we're all equal stakeholders. We each have a stake in the country that we live. Therefore, we should have the right to be represented. And that comes with a vote, no matter who you are. As long as you are an adult human, you should have a right to vote. And I think that's a Western value. But it sounds like Glen's going to go, well, that's not a Western value, that we all have equal rights.
We'll see.
I think he's treading a very dangerous line where he's going to go down, the Doug Wilson thing of, well, I think we should just take away votes and give one to the family and the man decides, basically.
I don't know if Glen would go there, but I don't know. Glen said some crazy fucking shit just so far tonight.
That's true. That's true.
So we'll see.
Depends what you consider to be the feminist movement, because there's not just one feminist movement. Like, are we on wave 5, or like which wave are we on? And it just goes to show that actually difference and equality is really difficult. And it's not as though the year 2025 is the utopian. We're at the Platonic ideal of how to relate equality.
Okay,
and
that's a red herring. Like, why are we? Just because, like, you're really sort of he's sidetracking. He's going from what rights should we have under a Western conception of society to what does the world look like practically at the moment. Like, he's gone from philosophy into, like, not even sociology, but rather sort of social analysis of the current world. Like, I get you. Like, if we want complete equality, we can't always achieve it, because of certain things like capitalism and bias in politics, and there's a ton of things. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't say, hey, this is a value that we hold. Because, I mean, I don't know what the Platonic ideal, but values are always ideals, right? If I say, hey, I have a value of justice, right? Like, I want justice. I want only the guilty to be punished and the innocent to be released, kind of thing. I want justice. You can't then say, well, we don't have some Platonic perfect ideal of justice where nobody is ever sentenced incorrectly, so that's not a value that you can hold. What?
Yeah, no, but I mean, when I see somebody desperately scrambling for another topic that isn't the topic, which is a thing he did against Woodford as well, but then, like, just iterating further and further away, like, what culture wars? Okay, feminism. Okay, what wave are we in? Okay, what's the state of the world? How does it measure against the Platonic ideal? Like, Glen, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, I don't believe in Platonic ideals, but I could easily say, hey, your values are Platonic ideals if you believe in that stuff, right? Like, the idea of freedom, that's an ideal, right? Like, it's a value that you hold. But if you want to consider a Platonic ideal, then fine. We're not talking about the state of the world. We're talking about ideals. We're talking about values. So this is just a smoke and mirrors, pocket sand.
Pay no attention to the men behind the curtain.
In fact, things are going back and forth with Supreme Court rulings.
Do you understand what I'm driving at, right? Like famously, Paul.
Thank you for cutting him off, Alex.
Yes. Yeah.
He was about to get into very red herring territory by bringing up the Supreme Court ruling.
Yes.
Who is the most important early Christian writer, to the extent that his letters, and some letters that were probably not written by him but claimed to be written by him as well, found their way into the scriptural canon and explicitly tell us things like
women should remain silent in churches. If they've got a question, they should go home and ask their husbands. For it's a disgrace for a woman to speak in church.
Which within the same book, so that's 1 Corinthians 14, isn't it?
That's right.
And then earlier in chapter 11,
Talking about prophesying.
it's women praying and prophesying. So either Paul is contradicting himself within 3 chapters, or, but
Paul contradicting himself.
Say it ain't so.
Heaven forbid.
Say it ain't so. And we do know, and Alex is 100% correct, that biblical scholars say that there are letters that were almost certainly written by Paul, and there were letters that almost certainly weren't written by Paul.
Mm-hmm. I was startled to learn that. That's another thing that I was first exposed to on Aaron's show, hanging out with all the Bible scholar types. They were like, "Oh yeah, like half of the letters are false. Out of what is it, 13 letters, 7 of them are false.
Yep.
Forgeries, like, and the rest have been heavily edited."
Yes. Interpolation. We have a word for this, that the church adding things in to their holy text after it's been written to be more conducive to the current thought. Like, we have a word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Interpolation.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
perhaps the word gune, which means wife and woman, is that's what he's saying.
What's he saying?
That there was a problem within Corinth. Worship services were an utter zoo. You have people speaking in tongues. You have people getting drunk at communion. And were there wives speaking over their husbands as they were preaching, right? And he's like, we'll sort that out at home, okay? I think that is the sort of interpretation of 1 Corinthians 14 that actually makes sense of 1 Corinthians 11.
That's a very interpretive interpretation. It sounds like a lot of excuse making and not much based on what we know.
And, you know, I think that there was the idea that women didn't preach in church. I think there was that, you know, it will be the man preaching. And that still is one of in the more traditional churches, including the Catholic Church, which is the largest one in America. That's still a thing. Women can't be priests. Women can't preach.
I disagree with that, of course. I disagree with that. I think the interpretation that makes sense is that Paul didn't write that verse and it found its way into the scriptural canon as a mistake because somebody had read 1 Timothy 2:11 onwards and was making a note in the margin and it found its way into the text. It's the only part of Paul's letters which move around in early manuscripts. It's really interesting. There's a lot of really good scholarship on why that wasn't actually written by Paul. Interestingly, I, as a skeptic of the biblical tradition, am able to absolve Paul and say Paul was not a sexist because he didn't write those words, whereas the Christian has to own them. It's in there. It's
nice. Yeah, there's a lot of problems about the Bible and about, you know, problems and dilemmas that atheism gets around. There's tons of problems that just don't apply to us. Like problem of evil doesn't apply to us. Doesn't touch us.
Like, nature has issues. It wasn't designed for us. We're doing our best with it, but it's
we're doing the best we can with what we got, and what we got isn't great, but you know, we're trying our best. We're doing our best. Let's do it.
Part of the scriptural canon, right? It doesn't just say, and by the way, you could say, right, this was, you know, like Timothy was written to like a church in Ephesus, and you had like the cult of Artemis, and yeah, there were women who were taking authority that wasn't right, like maybe, but we don't have that. We've inherited a scriptural tradition which has quite clearly been interpreted throughout history as saying that women, for a start, certainly can't hold church office. Now the Protestants changed their mind about that, but I don't know how they square that with what's in the scripture. What I'm saying is that, like, you don't think that the inequality between men and women might have been somehow bolstered by these kinds of biblical injunctions. I mean, Paul also
you
says
don't think that the reason why we are so interested in gender equality in the West has anything to do with Christianity?
It depends what you mean by anything to do with Christianity.
Yeah, that's another example of that all or nothing thinking. Like, it's either completely from Christianity or it's anti-Christian. Like, maybe that's not even relevant to the question. You know,
maybe it influenced it. Maybe you know. But I think Alex's comment earlier is really prescient on this. That sometimes the impetus to establish some sort of right or equality for people was in response to Christianity denying those rights. Right? Like the suffrage movement, that wasn't happening in churches. that was out on the streets, that was, you know, in areas where women met up, that was run by women for women. Like, you cannot possibly claim the suffrage movement as a Christian movement. There's no possible way.
Right. Like, there were a number of Christians in it, but
Right.
I mean, several times over this past Women's History Month on the Deep Dives show, we went into women's suffrage and certain people from the early women's movement. And in a number of these cases, we go through the people's history and the suffragette meetings they were at and so forth. There'd be disagreement about how to move forward with the movement, because inevitably somebody was a pastor's wife and stood up and was like, well, women shouldn't do that because the Bible says. Even though they're trying to get women the vote, they're still holding back women in the name of Christianity.
But it's like slavery. There was churches on board with it, right? There were churches and pastors' wives that their pastor went, yeah, I support this. But to say that was Christianity supporting it, I think is a mistake. Like, we've got to define what Christianity is. So I you know, just because, like, today, so, like, you know, some churches still think that women shouldn't vote.
Oh yeah,
So,
in fact, here in the U.S., the Southern Baptists just had another split. They banished 2 churches from their collective because they had women preachers. They weren't even like the head pastor. They were just preachers who happen to be women. And the Southern Baptists are like, nope, you're not part of us anymore. Bye. So I guess now they're independent, whatever. I don't know what happens to churches after they're banished, but yeah, it's still a thing today, this year.
Well, okay, so we've got this because I think that when you look at the history of rights, you're not looking at a blossoming of Christian tradition. I think what you're looking at is people beginning to assert their own self-interest. I mean, the case in point for this, right? Like, if you want to look for a sort of archetypal origin of rights talk,
which I wasn't going to mention it because it strikes me as a tangent in my brain, but it does have some bearing on today's discussion. The Southern Baptists, one must recall, had to sell their Nashville headquarters to pay the legal fees, not just the penalties for the hurting little children in very naughty ways that their clergy has done. That's not the penalty. That's to cover the legal fees. They have been adjudicated as liable for so many cases of such great financial damage that the legal fees alone, they had to sell their, I think it was a $34 million headquarters to pay for.
Wow.
Now that is apparently a Christian value, because every fucking church has this same problem and have had for hundreds of years, and none of them have done a fucking thing about it.
Yeah. Well, I think sort of some of times when Christians pointed, hey, that's happening in a lot of different areas. Yes, I get you. But usually it is not covered up by the heads of that organization, right? Usually what happens is that somebody reports this person and they get into a lot of trouble. In the church, somebody reported the people doing it and the higher ups went, well, let's just move them to another church. Let's just cover it up, move it to another church. Let us never speak of it again. God will sort them out.
Yes. God will handle this. Probably.
Spoiler alert, God did not, in fact, handle it.
In fact, you might expect that if God were around and still in control, considering, Jesus with the whole suffered the little children come unto me sort of deal, even if he, for whatever reason, has been maintaining radio silence for a couple thousand years, he would see the suffering of the children at the hands of his clergy, and that would make him speak the fuck up. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
in the UK, it's going to be Magna Carta, right? If you look at the Magna Carta, what happened? Like there's this incompetent king who the barons are all really upset with, and he's charging them too much money. And so what do? They show up with their swords and they say, you have to stop doing this, and you have to agree to abide by the certain kind of rules that we're all going to agree to, and you're going to be below the law. And the king, with 500 swords in his face, goes, okay, fine. And that's where you get the birth of rights. It's not a bunch of people sat around having, meditating and praying and going, you know what, I think that God would want us to have these rights. And the same thing happens.
And I must say, King Charles visited America recently and pointed out that the Magna Carta is cited in so many Supreme Court rulings. It's actually, one of the pivotal documents. But we've got to remember that the Magna Carta wasn't this, and Alex is right, it wasn't people should have these individual rights, nobody should be above the law. It really was the barons going, hey, you are basically doing whatever you want and we've got to obey the law. The king will be subject to his own laws, right? It wasn't for the people, it was for them. It was for the barons, and there were certain rights that the barons had that they could not take away. Now, this was expanded upon to say, hey, we would extend all of these rights to all people in the kingdom, basically, that the king can't just go and take things because he is the one in power. They have a right to, and then you get the life, liberty, and property. But the thing about life, liberty, and property is you can't take it away without due process, right? Like you have to have a reason. It has to go through the court system kind of thing. So there is a rider to that. But he's absolutely right. It wasn't done by churches going, the king should be held to a standard. No, the church was saying the king's there by divine right. He gets to do whatever the hell he wants to. He is the representative of God that was chosen by God to rule over the country. And this isn't some abstract thing. The king is crowned in England. The king is crowned by the Archbishop of Westminster, right? He is crowned by the highest authority of the church, right? The one who gives the king the power is the head priest. Don't forget that.
And that's true in a lot of coronations. Like especially in Europe, the whole divine right of kings is a huge part of history. But also that brings to mind the alternative, right? Like we've talked a lot about how rights aren't achieved because a priest had a revelation. It's because people stood up and said, this is going to stop, or we turn you into Caesar. Swiss cheese, whatever.
It's the Archbishop of Canterbury. Sorry, Archbishop of Canterbury.
I thought, but I was
I mixed it up because it happens at Westminster Abbey, so I mixed it up. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the bishop. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, it's all good. But there's the Western Europe likes to take credit for this idea of rights, but it's kind of the reverse. Like if you look back in the Greek writings and the Persian writings and the Egyptian writings and the Chinese writings and the Indian writings, everyone just had what we now call rights. It was just assumed. And then people came along later and said, well, it's God's will that you should be lesser, that your family should be in this caste as the untouchables, or that people who don't have penises shouldn't be allowed to speak in church, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not just the church it's taking rights away from people, but the church was used as a lever to do that humans, as we moved into civilization, we had an understanding that rights wasn't even a thing. All people generally had the same, at least legal standing. You'd get warlords who did what they wanted because no one was going to stop them. But they would never, in the old days, you would never get a warlord saying, well, it is just philosophically, morally true that the people that I'm ruling over are lesser beings. They didn't bother with that. They were like, no, I have the most swords, I win.
Well, but there is a sort of modern thought that the social contract always existed, that as a ruler, so basically the social contract says that you the ruler only rules by the consent of the ruled, basically. So if you were that warlord with 10,000 swords kind of thing, and you had all this power, if you started just willy-nilly killing your men, taking their families, just doing horrible things to them, odds are somebody would stick one of those swords in your back, right? Like there is a sort of obligation for a ruler who may do horrible stuff to other people, granted, like totally understand, but there are certain cultural and societal norms that they wouldn't cross, or they crossed very rarely, or they wouldn't upset their followers, because your entire position relies on those people not being angry at you and sort of believing you're working in their best interests, right? There is still that social contract, because a lot of rulers would do, especially the English kings, and this is what led to the Magna Carta and laws being applied to the king, is them doing horrible stuff to their subjects, and their subjects burning down the fucking castle, like just basically rising up against them and having a rebellion. So these families and these noble families and these rulers would get a good idea of what they could do and what they couldn't do, right? Like things that they couldn't do. If you had a powerful family, they were very well connected, they had a lot of friends with all the nobles and lesser people kind of thing, you couldn't just go and burn down their entire thing and take all their shit. But if you had sort of like the Templars, for instance, a group that was getting stronger and a lot of people owed money to, but they didn't really have a lot of political support, you could go and accuse them of heresy and take their crap. Yes. So it wasn't like the social contract didn't exist. It's just that it's been very much more defined these days. And what we are attempting to do, as far as the great experiment, the democratic experiment, is a way to remove people that have broken the social contract without violent revolution. That's it.
That's a big part, for sure.
Yeah.
But what I was mainly getting at is that the concept of rights as we understand them today isn't. The concept has been developed over time, but it wasn't necessary in the beginning, because it was largely not exclusively the Christian church, but the Christians got in on it, removed people's rights. And so it's similar to other things. It's a reaction to the regressive controlling action of religion, pushing back against that's given us rights, rather than deriving the rights through the religion. It's been the opposite. Right. The religion took away our rights, and over thousands of years we've been gradually getting them back.
Right. I mean, if you trace it all the way back to just tribes and things, there might have been one person who was sort of a chief, but people were sort of loose conglomerations of families kind of thing. I don't think there was sort of an idea of rights. It's just, if you're a dick, you were thrown out of the tribes and you died. There was a certain obligation to behave in a social way, because if you didn't, you would die in the wilderness alone.
Yeah, civilization was voluntary, and leadership was a responsibility, a duty. Sometimes it came with certain privileges, but primarily the only legitimate function of any government has been to make life better for the people. And if you didn't do that, you got replaced by one that did. And sometimes you get replaced anyway when a better option came along. That's why there were empires that city-states would voluntarily surrender to, not necessarily because they didn't want to fight, but because they were like, yeah, your system's better. We want to be part of your thing.
Yeah.
Gender equality concerns of 2025 are important to you. In which culture or civilization would you rather live? One that has a Christian tradition behind it, or one that has not?
Well, it depends. I mean, what other kind of traditions are you talking about? Well, there's Islam around the world.
Well,
Is
who
it-
wants
is
to
it-
live there?
Of course, he goes immediately to Islam.
Yeah.
Would you rather be in a Christian country or Islam? Ooh, scary brown
Well,
people.
I don't know. I mean, I found Japan to be absolutely fantastic to live in, and or visit. I guess I don't know how I'd do living there, but I think I would enjoy it, except for sort of the language barrier. I found Japanese people to be exceedingly polite, even just to a fault. Like, it was so polite, so kind. Charitable. I found them to be very decent people, like really decent people. They would go out of their way for you. They were polite. Canadians are rude by comparison to the Japanese, like absolutely rude bastards. Quite frankly, I'm sorry if Kip's still here. I'm calling him a rude bastard, but I stand in comparison to the Japanese. Everybody's rude. I think I would happily live there. I think, and that's definitely not a country with a huge Christian tradition. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely Christians there, but you can't say that their sort of cultural norms are influenced by Christianity. There's no way.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about South Korea because Christianity has been growing there. But
Yes.
like South Korea existed before that, though.
Well, I mean, South Korea has had a sort of wild history. It's had a very, very strange history. And the sort of, I mean, don't forget that when South Korea first sort of became separate to North Korea, they had a dictator, right? Like, it was a dictator. It was a friendly American dictator, basically. It really was a lot more like North Korea, except just not communist. So its history has been definitely varied, and I mean, they've got a rich history, but I think that them embracing sort of American values has had a big part to play in it, kind of thing, and in how they are at the moment, which wasn't originally there. It's just they didn't want to be taken over by the communists.
Yeah. And in fairness, as much as I like the concept of communism as an economic system, the communists, as in the political party, I think Islam doesn't scare me the way Glenn is blah blah blahing. I realize that in many countries that happen to be Islamic, I would not exactly be welcome or celebrate.
Right.
But it's not Islam that does that. But a communist society of that ilk and tradition, I think I might, if I were forced to choose and those were the only two options, I think I might still take a Christian country in that circumstance.
Well, I mean, I think that if you have it depends what Christians, right? Because if you have Doug Wilson in charge, you're probably in the same position you are going to an Islamic country. Me as a white man kind of thing, I would probably be fine. Although, I wouldn't consider it a stretch for Doug Wilson to outlaw atheists. I wouldn't consider that a great stretch kind of thing. So, but definitely, I would be better off than you in an Islamic country, or just because I fit this paradigm. But I think he's poisoning the well a little. I think he's sort of saying, well, would you rather be in a Christian country than an Islamic country, kind of thing. But I think that for my money, I would rather be in a more secular country, like Sweden or Netherlands or something, right? I think that might actually be better. Or you might say, hey, I'd rather be in Australia, which is more secular than the United States.
Oh, yes.
So, it depends what you're talking about. But you're only talking about, well, what religion is predominant, right? Rather than, do you want the Christian-controlled country or the non-Christian controlled country?
Yeah. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I think he's really distorting things here to say, well, you've got to choose only between countries that have some religious background.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna limit the options to only the things that fit my narrative. Also, like I mean, I don't want to jump directly to accusing him of racism, but the fact he really quickly jumped to that is telling. But also, I can't shake the idea that he throws that out because that's what worked on Dawkins. Like someone came at Dawkins with, well, what about the scary brown people? And Dawkins went, oh, well, obviously, I depend on the Christians to protect me from the horrors of Islam.
Yeah.
Of course, Dawkins is, you know, he's got some other bigotry problems, notably.
Yeah, he can be a jerk. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he is a good environment, a good evolutionary biologist. Not so sure about. Well, I think as in comparison to my knowledge of evolutionary biology, he's still quite good, but I don't know how good a person he is.
Yeah.
Right, like that's a completely different.
I've seen him talk with school children, and granted, there were cameras there that he was aware of, so he may have been acting, but he came across as very kind. But if you put him in the same position today, he'd start screaming obscenities at people.
Yeah, I mean, look, just because someone's very kind towards school children doesn't mean they can be, you know, morally correct on everything. I mean, it's like having a grandpa who's, you know, he's very kind and a warm, caring person, but has a very, very low opinion of brown people or something. You know, like it really is this. Well, you know, grandpa's a nice guy, but you know, he's got these outdated opinions, and I think. Dawkins is probably the same. He's sort of he can be nice, but he has these really archaic, outdated opinions that have been completely debunked, and Grandpa hasn't caught up yet. And the other thing is, I think Dawkins did change a bit after he had his stroke. And I'm not excusing it at all because it wasn't, you know, transformative, but I think that he had less patience and doubled down on bad ideas a bit more after he had like that major sort of stroke that he had, which I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. That's just my personal opinion, but that's my opinion that he had. He really, but maybe it was that after that he just didn't give a fuck about covering up his horrible ideas anymore. Like, don't get me wrong, like he could have just been pretending and had those opinions the entire time. It's just after then I think he was more terrible. Yeah. Oh yeah. Tangent. Max Tangent's here.
It happens. Although that one is definitely my fault. I mentioned the parallel with Dawkins because of well, what about Islam though?
I think that's going to be the next time I do some role playing. That's going to be my character name is Max Tangents. I really think so. I really think so.
That's fair. Who decided putting us on a show together was a good idea?
I don't know. I think wasn't it your idea? Didn't you suggest like shouldn't we do this together?
Okay. So, in fairness, what happened was. The very first episode, we didn't even plan to do episodes, is there was a debate with Kent Hovind and a bunch of our friends. There was Amy Newman and James W. and Andrew, who uses the.
It was more like a call-in open room, wasn't it? It was like a
kind of
people were but it was just one person at a time, kind of challenging Kent Hovind. I don't know. That's my memory of it. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but it was not the evil Andrew who can't spell anything right. It was Science Andrew, who doesn't come around very much anymore. But it was a different Andrew, just to be clear.
Yes. I know the guy. Andrew Cumming, I think it was. Andrew Cumming?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've seen him, but he is still around.
Yeah. Hey, people are busy. I think he was more interested in the real science stuff rather than theology, philosophy, and things like that. He was, you know, Andrew's more, hey, hard science kind of thing. And I think he was more, he liked flat earthers, you know, and hassling flat earthers and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but TLDR, all these people, they showed up to do battle with Kent, and I was tempted myself, but there were issues that particular day, so I watched from the side. And then Mark, you came in somewhere like a couple hours into this running thing they had going. And so
Right.
I was like, all right, I want to do a review of this since I couldn't actually play myself. I want to like do a review. And since you missed the first couple hours, would you like to come do this review with me? And so we did,
Right.
and it was
Right.
fun and fantastic. And then you were like, hey, I want to review this. Why don't you come over to my place and we'll do this review?
Yeah,
and this was back when we do a whole review in like one video, because it was years ago.
Yes, yes. We had less to say. Yes.
And then we just kept doing that.
Well, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot more fun than me sitting down alone and sort of, you know, just ranting to myself. I get to rant to you. That's way more fun.
Sure.
Yeah, bring it on. And yeah.
I rant back. Yeah.
Yeah. You rant back. Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of want to look up what our first two-parter was, because it was a few episodes in. Like, we'd been doing it several weeks and we were like, all right, we can't quite finish, because we were reaching the point, because we did say more and more each time.
Yes.
And we were reaching the point where we were hitting 6-hour episodes and we were like, this is ridiculous. We have to just at some point cut it up and be like, we'll do a second part. And it was a big deal with splitting into 2 parts. And
yep. Wow, that's so when you're asking whose stupid idea it was to get us together to do reviews, it was your idea, Ember. It was your idea.
I blame past Ember.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's
a very venerable tradition.
I think I wouldn't mind living in a Buddhist tradition, for example.
Yeah. In terms of gender equality, in terms of right speak, in terms
of
like,
kind of right speak.
It's not exactly, and that's really the thesis.
But do you think, for example, that the feminist movement, you know, women having the right to vote, representation and power, even, you know, being allowed to run for office as well in the first place, do you think that would have happened, would have gotten off the ground, if women themselves hadn't just tried to assert it for themselves? Do you think, in other words, if they'd have done what the Bible tells them to do, and to essentially stay silent and ask their husbands at home, instead of coming out and saying, you know, we've got something that we want and we're going to throw ourselves under horses until we get it?
Female suffrage. Female suffrage.
Do you think that men on their own, that like Christian men of the Enlightenment era would have just sat around and gone, you know what? You know, it's been hundreds and hundreds of years that we've been Christian, and I think, and there's all these verses that I think we've been getting it wrong, and I think we should give women the right to vote. Do you think they would have just done that on their own because of the influence of Christianity?
Listen, I mean, just read through the.
Really? Okay,
Really?
so quick history lesson, folks, and we've covered this on the deep dive show. There's very little I haven't covered on the deep dive show. Okay, there's a lot still. I wish I could still do them, but health issues, not important. Point is, in England's suffrage, very different from U.S. suffrage.
Oh yeah.
There was a lot of violence. The suffragettes turned into a sort of terrorist group. They were blowing things up. They were doing it very carefully and making sure that the buildings were empty first, because they didn't want to hurt a person, which was very considerate of them. But they were blowing shit up because they went to a peaceful protest and they were attacked by the police and raped in the street in the name of God and country. But like, the people, no one was held accountable for it. No one was thrown in prison. No one was punished. The few people who were identified they claimed it was justified because the women were not adhering to the social role decreed by God.
Do you know the first place to enact women's suffrage?
The very first, to give suffrage as in the right to vote. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
New Zealand.
Oh.
Yeah, followed by Australia afterwards.
It makes sense. All you criminals.
If you've ever met the Australian women, you will understand why we just capitulated straight away, quite frankly.
It seems wise.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knew that, you know, women that had survived through, you know, incredibly hostile environment would be, you know, very, very hard to argue with. It's yeah, absolutely.
It just seems so strange to me that somebody didn't one day just go, why don't women have the right to vote? Women should have the right to vote. And everyone else didn't go, yeah, that's a weird oversight in our society. We should fix that right away. Like,
Yeah.
it's such an obvious thing. Why even was there fighting? Christian values.
Yep. But I would argue that, you know, it may have been influenced by a number of factors, including, you know, the influence of Maori culture.
Mhm.
Because
I mean, you would hope, you would think so. But on the other hand,
yeah,
we have, you know, indigenous people here. Many of them either had equality in a general sense, or were matriarchal, like the Hopi, for example.
mhm.
And so you'd think maybe it's because the New Zealanders actually value Maori culture as opposed to the way
Maybe.
we do things in the US.
Well, New Zealand is really interesting as far as colonialism is concerned, because the English never actually conquered New Zealand, right? They made a treaty with the Maoris, who were putting up way too much of a fight. Like, they were absolutely ridiculously entrenched in the mountains of New Zealand, and were like, they basically went, yeah, no, this isn't working. We've got to make a treaty with these people, and you know, that's how their country became New Zealand. So it's very interesting that it wasn't a case of colonization, subjugation of the native peoples, and then acceding them rights retroactively, because, you know, we went, oh, that's kind of horrible. You know, these people should have rights in our country because, you know, we kind of stole it from them. What happened in other, it was more, we cannot beat these people. We better actually hammer out some sort of treaty so we can both live here in peace.
I'd say that's very magnanimous of the Maoris, because
Yeah.
I don't know, my inclination is these invaders come and kill a bunch of my friends. No living here in peace. Get the fuck out.
Well, I mean, the people invading did have a lot of technology, and you might say, well, how did they possibly withstand? If you've ever seen a Maori haka, you will understand why it resulted in not conquest, but rather a treaty between the two. Because if you've ever seen a haka, it is one of the most frightening frigging things you can be. They do it before the rugby. It's basically their war dance, and it is frightening as fuck. Like, seriously, it is something.
Yes. I mean, I haven't seen one of the rugby matches, but I've encountered bits and pieces, and they can be extremely terrifying.
The thing is, they're such nice guys. Like, the Maori people are just gorgeous. They're lovely people. You know, it's just, yeah, you know, their culture is, well, if you attack me, I'm going to absolutely fuck you up. And it's like, yeah, but you know, you don't have to attack them. They're really nice people. They're really kind, really sweet.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I think one of the random book series is that I have enjoyed very much over the last few years is called He Who Fights with Monsters. And
Okay.
it's wild. Like, every book is He Who Fights with Monsters 5 or He Who Fights with Monsters 6. Like, there isn't a different title for each one. And the main character, he's like this fell into the role superhero kind of guy, and it's a fascinating story. It's really, really funny. He's preoccupied with cooking. So, like,
Okay.
he kills the monsters and then goes and throws a barbecue. But he's got a Maori friend from another universe, but never mind that. And he's such a sweet guy until it's time to do battle, and then he mercilessly crushes the opposition, and then he's like, so what we having for the barbie, eh?
Mm-hmm. Well, what that's for Barbie, eh? You know, that guy from Avengers, Korg, that big stone guy. He's basically what a Maori guy is like. Like, they are really nice people. Did you see them do a haka in Parliament?
Yeah. That's what I
cool.
was thinking of. I think that was
Yeah,
the first time I saw one, and like even in the Parliament, like that was.
Yep.
I'm like, shit, that's scary.
Mhm.
Like maybe don't piss these people off. I mean,
They're actually-
ideally, we wouldn't be pissing anyone off. We deal with them like people, but Western values or something.
Mhm.
The protests of women.
Read through the book of Acts, and you will see Philip's got his 4 daughters who are all evangelists. You have Priscilla and Aquila. She is named first in this house church. She is correcting Barnabas when he's going off on one. He gets to the end of the book of Romans, and Romans chapter 16 is just talking about all his co-workers, and there's women everywhere. There's Junia, who is outstanding among the apostles. There's Phoebe, the deacon. This is extraordinary. And so taking that trajectory and moving it forwards, I think the most obvious explanation for why universal suffrage has had a Western intellectual genealogy is surely Christianity.
But like, as in, do you think those were the conversations that men of their own accord were having? Like, absent the protests of women who were getting fed up with their material conditions, do you think that men were just sitting around having these conversations going, you know Junia and Phoebe were really important, and, Paul seems to say that she's an apostle, and so maybe we should give women the right to it. Like, you think that would have just happened without the assertion of people? Like, I think that...
but I think that's fine. The assertion of, female agitation for female suffrage is wonderful.
I'm saying without that, you think that it would have happened? Do you think that it would have been successful? I think if you look at the history of rights...
But you seem to be assuming that the only kind of person who would agitate for female suffrage would themselves not be driven by Christian convictions.
Okay. But the question is, and here's the thing, Christianity had been around for a long time before the suffrage movement, right? And they didn't have those conversations. They locked women up. They didn't, any woman that tried to have rights equal to a man was basically slapped down. Christianity has been in charge for a long time. And it seems like when the Enlightenment happened and this idea of equal rights came along, that's when women started standing up. Why didn't the men in Christianity have that conversation and do it earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If all it requires...
I know.
You're saying, it's because of, Paul had these writings about Phoebe, about all of these biblical women kind of thing, that they had rights and they had privileges and they had all these things. Well, then why didn't it happen for thousands of years? Because those writings were still around back then.
Yeah. Like we've had this all this time. It's the same thing. In fact, it's very closely linked to the abolition movement. We've had these writings and these ideas for all this time. Why did it take until the 19th century to start abolishing slavery if it was based on these things? And these are very closely linked. Like, I'm not sure what the specific ignition of the women's suffrage movement in the UK was. But here in the US, from our public schools to our national parks, everything says it was voting rights for former slaves. They were saying, wait, why do Black men who are just now being recognized as full people and citizens go directly to voting when we still can't vote? The fuck's up with that?
Yes.
And that's a big part of the reason. I mean, Frederick Douglass was a big part of the women's suffrage movement.
Right.
Because he was like, yeah, this is obviously bullshit.
Yes. And it obviously is. But if it is a product of Paul's letters and Christian thinking, then why didn't it happen when Christianity had a monopoly on societal reform?
Mm-hmm. Any pope could have just said, based on Christian values, women are now equal. I mean, we're still keeping serfs, obviously, but like women are legally equal to men in the same station.
Yep.
Well, you seem to think that I would have a problem with suffrage coming because there were women agitating for the vote. I don't have a problem with that, and I don't see how
they were doing so because they were sort of going to church and learning that they should emancipate themselves from the pulpit. Well, rather than just being a bit fed up with the material conditions that they found themselves in.
Oh, I think it's both.
I mean, so for example, the only time...
all women everywhere might be fed
I would love to know which churches Glenn imagines were preaching women's suffrage.
Yeah.
Up with patriarchal societies, who has overturned patriarchy more than Western societies? And is it? It seems to me that the default position.
What?
Who has overturned patriarchy more than Western? Well, like I was saying, the Cathars sort of overturned patriarchy, and they were killed by the church. So, like, I think he's sort of trying to say, hey, you know, but we sort of overturning patriarchy is an action by Christianity, but that's not like overturning patriarchy in the West. I see Alex O'Connor as having a point where that may be a response to the extreme patriarchy of the church. Like, you can't have the churches and Christianity go, well, it is the men that's in charge, women should know their place, and the society pushing back on that and then going, oh, well, we caused patriarchy to be overturned.
Yeah, we're going to spend centuries building a wall and then take credit for taking one brick off the wall.
Yeah. Or that people climb over it and you say, hey, the only reason you climbed over it is that wall was there. So
Yes.
You're welcome.
You can thank us later.
Yeah, you can thank us for that wall, because without that wall, you wouldn't have to climb over it. You know what? It really does remind me of like the arsonist who shows up, you know, with a bucket and you know, water at the fire that they lit. You know what I mean? Like, it really does seem like that, you know.
Yeah.
Where's my medal? I'm a hero.
I have helped.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Is when we look back at our Christianized history, when we look at other cultures and notice that they have not had those same developments, you might imagine that there is some alternative history that could have got us to where we got to. But that seems to me an implausible story, and that seems to me an untestable story. The story.
Yes.
I mean, so I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying yes, because one of the big problems of this is testability. But I want to talk about that. But I really just want to sort of. There are all kinds of reasons why this could have only happened in the West. You know, it might have had some. I mean, I think that a lot of the development of people's individual rights, their ability to begin asserting them, had a lot to do with technology. You know, like feminism in particular. Really importantly, some of the roles that society could not do without.
The washing machine
Exactly.
transformed feminism.
So much, right? And so it's easy to say that it's because, you know, they were going to church. I mean, if that was the case, why didn't they do it 500 years ago? Why then? That happened to coincide with technological developments, which allowed them to get out on the street and protest, right? Now, that might be that we might then need to talk about the scientific revolution as to why washing machines were invented in the first place, and we're going to disagree on that. But I really want to like just drill down here and think like, I think that people who are living in oppressive conditions will have a motivation to, when they have an opportunity, try to overcome that, regardless of whether or not they're Christians. The only time in history that there's been a successful slave revolt on the level of a society, whereby like slavery has been overthrown and a new government and colonialism thrown off and slavery abolished
Haiti,
of their own accord because of their own revolt, is the Haitian Revolution. It's in Haiti.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I do not think that Haitians were living in slavery under colonial rule and they were kind of okay with it. And then they started thinking about Christianity and read the Bible and decided, you know what, now it's time to rise up. I think that there was enough in the disutility and the preference against the conditions they were living in that when they saw an opportunity, they seized it and did so successfully. And I think that that is the history of rights. I think that Magna Carta is a result of barons holding swords to the king.
Yeah.
I think that feminism is a result.
Yes. Every single time it's been people rising up and saying, give us what we're demanding or we're going to take even more.
Yeah, and I think that the social contract, the idea that you can only govern with the consent of the people, is a lot better explanation of that than just, well, it comes from Christianity.
Yeah,
I think that
unrelated.
Sorry, go ahead. Well,
I was just saying
that
it's almost unrelated.
Yeah, well, I think that Christianity it propped up a lot of those dictators, the monarchy, for a long time, way longer than it's been advocating for you know, equal rights for people. I think it did have a place in the hierarchy as the supporter and the it sort of legitimized the kings across Europe. I honestly think it did. So you can't argue that those archbishops, those the pontiff, either endorsing or excommunicating a king, that it was not participating in that unfair system to a large degree. So to sort of then claim, well, oh, equality comes from Christianity, it's like, well, then why did the same people who were reading your book that you have for thousands of years support and endorse this system that were absolutely complicit in this this feudal system, which was incredibly unequal rights?
Yeah, I think if Glenn were more of a critical thinker, he could actually take advantage of Alex's mention of the scientific revolution and point out that for many centuries, most Christians didn't read the Bible. They had to listen to the pastors, well, the priests and the popes and the cardinals and the bishops and so forth,
Right.
because they weren't allowed to. And even if they had been, it's in church Latin, which many of them didn't speak.
Right.
So it was only the advent of the printing press. Plus, now to be clear, the printing press was not this end all be all that people make it out to be. You could print stuff in other ways just as fast before it. The difference with the printing press was the movable type, so you could change what you're printing relatively easily. It wasn't not important. We've had the ability to make prints longer than we've had a written language. We've got cylinder seals from before we had cuneiform with images and shit on them, and you could put ink on them and roll them on parchment or whatever the fuck you got and make copies. So we've had copiers longer than we've had writing, but never mind. The point is, making the texts more widely available, especially in translated forms, that, he could argue, helped drive the Enlightenment, which led to the later changes, abolition and suffrage and so forth, and people gaining access to the Bible to be able to read it. That's the big deal with the Gutenberg Bible, is it was the first time people reasonably had a chance of having their own Bible. It did change the world. So if he were just a little more curious, he might be able to make those connections based on Alex saying that. But I don't think he's got that.
But I mean, but then again, that's not really Christianity. That's technology. That is the technology of the printing press and movable type that is causing that, because having print more widely, like once the Bible had been printed, it's not like just the Bible was printed. And yeah, that's essentially what it was created for. But that doesn't mean that it's responsible. It's the technology that drove that, not Christianity. So I think Alex has got a really good point here.
Oh, for sure. And I personally would give technology the credit there as well. But I could argue it the other way. And in fact, I could go a step further and say a lot of people only became literate by learning to read with a Bible. So even though it's not Christianity that gave them Plato and Aristotle and Locke and Kant and so forth, but it was Christianity that gave them the ability to take in that knowledge later. And it's not Christianity, but it's the fact Christianity exists, and therefore the Bible exists, and therefore they were able to learn to read from a Bible.
Yeah, but you would have to argue, because you're arguing ideals like Christian values led to Western value, or Christian ideals, or Christianity. You would have to argue that that's exclusive to Christianity. So you'd have to sort of argue if, hey, it was Islam that they wanted to print the Quran, invented the printing machine for the Quran, that the same things wouldn't happen. Because if the same things would happen in that case, which people would learn to read, they'd just learn to read the Quran rather than the Bible, they would still learn to read, then that's not exclusive to Christianity. It's exclusive to the technology. It's exclusive to the printing press. And I think I would argue that if if it was just the Quran that was printed instead of the Bible, and everybody, went, oh, well, we've got to do the Gutenberg Quran instead of the Gutenberg Bible, I think that people would still learn to read. And not only that, it would lead to the same sort of industrial revolution, societal revolution that happened under Christianity.
That's a really good point. Like we could consider the counterfactuals. Like so many people say the Western world owes its history to Christianity because it was the Christian Crusades and so forth that kept the Islamic Empire from overrunning Europe. And that's somewhat true, but so what? Because if Islam had overrun Europe, sure, it would have been a bloody conquest. But once it was done, the same thing would have happened.
I think
in fact,
so,
the Renaissance might have happened sooner because suddenly all those ancient classical texts are reintroduced to the West.
Yeah. And, we would have a far better understanding of the influence of the golden age of Islam. And like a lot of that was scientific in nature, or, sort of before science, but at least scientific in nature.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I dare say we would have had a very similar progress. Once Islam started to shatter, into different independent caliphates and shit, you'd end up with a different religion, but effectively pretty much the same Europe we had.
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So is Europe doing a Europe inevitable regardless of religion? I think it's hard to say for sure, but it's certainly plausible.
It's plausible, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Of women saying, we don't want to do this anymore. I think that slavery is as a result in the Haitian Revolution of the slave.
In the Haitian Revolution.
But in other cases, it's the development of photography. Think of the importance, and not solely, but think of the importance of Paul Peter, the lashed back, the image that shocks everybody, right? Like it's not as simple as just saying that some people started thinking about Christianity and going to church, and that's what motivated them. Because if that's the case, why did it take so long? And why did it coincidentally come along with the Enlightenment? You know what I mean?
Okay. Should we go to slavery and abolition? Is that, or is there something you want to say?
Let me just, I won't add to that. I'll clarify. I think one thing my book, The Air We Breathe, doesn't really do is the sort of technology shock stuff. It doesn't talk about material conditions, which is a lack. And you might get the idea that these 7 values kind of float down as Platonic ideals and just embed themselves in Western values. It was a lot messier. And your description of Magna Carta is a good example of 5 steps forwards, 4 steps back, bloody, mixed motives. Technology is playing a part. Enrichment is playing a part. So I totally take that. Nevertheless,
so he's already conceded,
he's acknowledged,
without actually saying so, that Christianity is not the single cause.
Well, isn't that a massive oversight in his book? If you don't take material conditions into an account, like, isn't that a huge oversight? Like, if you're talking about the values that Western society has, like, freedom of expression and freedom of bodily autonomy and all of these values, isn't like not taking material conditions, isn't that ridiculous? Because it wasn't like because they needed to be acknowledged in some sort of cognitive way that women had the suffragette movement. It wasn't because they, felt like they were due respect from people or something. It wasn't that ephemeral. It wasn't that sort of, abstract. It was, hey, we deserve to be able to have an influence on how the country runs, because how the country runs affects me, right? And it affects Susan over there, and it affects Jessica, it affects all of us. And so why don't we have a say? Like, that's material conditions. So the fact that he has acknowledged that he skipped this major influence, it does feel like a concession.
Yeah, at the very least, it's not exclusively Christianity. So now he's on his back foot trying to argue that there's any Christianity involved. And like, I don't know. If I were Alex in this position, I would pounce on that. I'd be like, all right, so you agree it's not Christianity alone,
Exclusively,
the
yeah.
best you can do at this point is that Christianity played a role, and now all we can talk about is how big that role was.
Right. But nobody's arguing that. Like, nobody's arguing that Christianity played no role in the development of modern Western society. No one's arguing that. You know, I would say that, fascism played a role as well. You know, insofar as, hey, we wanted to fight against it, so we sent people off. You know what I mean? Like, just playing a role doesn't mean that it's the air we breathe, or, you know, it's this background fabric of the thing.
It's pretty wild.
Oh yeah.
I'm curious how this is going to go for the second half at this point.
Can I just point out that the air we breathe, which is the name of his book suggesting like the air we breathe is literally, like, if you take it literally, it is a material condition. Like, it is the material air around it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, Glenn, why do you do this to yourself?
You know, as the great prophetess Madonna once said, we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl.
She certainly was. Yeah, absolutely.
All those sorts of vicissitudes of historical conditions are happening everywhere in the world. And it seems to be, yeah, but you asked me that question, isn't it? Why within Christendom did this happen? Where, around the time of the Enlightenment, 16, 17, 1800s, where were the most, like, where was the most technological development happening? Well, China, right? Oh, okay, all right. Like, look, but seriously, China, I mean, the ships, like, in China, the
ships aren't really doing much for the material conditions of.
Well, they could do if they used them, you know, unfortunately, like the New World explorers did for resource extraction and that kind of thing.
If anything, that the development of, you know, better ships would make the slaves, you know, have a better time under the boats, right? I'm talking about the kinds of material condition, the changes in material conditions that were relevant to the assertion of rights. I don't actually know where the washing machine was invented, but I would guess it was probably in the West. I don't know that for sure. But, like, I just think it is extraordinary to think that there is this history, thousands of years long, of, like, textual evidence of the differential treatment of women, and a church history of the differential treatment of women, and a society which has historically been quite brutal to women over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds
compared to
and
what?
hundreds and hundreds of years.
Compared to what?
Compared to what we think today.
Okay, but
now, when that finally happens, Christians want to turn around and say, oh, that's because of Christianity. That's because over those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, nobody realized that this was what was really being gotten at all along. And this just so happens to coincide with the technological revolution and Enlightenment thought.
Enlightenment thought.
Right. It's sort of a genetic fallacy thing. It's saying, well, you know, Albert Einstein was brought up in he was originally German, and so therefore German is the superior race.
Right.
It's exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Like, rights predates Enlightenment thought.
Not really. Like, where do you think rights come from? Where's like an early source of rights? Let's allow Glenn a chance to sketch out a bit of historical detail for why you see Christianity informing those Enlightenment values.
I think that 11th, 12th century canon lawyers doing the flip side of our obligation. So I have an obligation to a poor person, and that is for the person in power in order to serve the person who is powerless. In the 11th, 12th centuries, you start to get the idea of the poor person has a right to sustenance. They are entitled, right? And that starts to be a discourse that is developed through the medieval period, to the point where somebody like a John Locke, you know, coming along sort of post-Reformation, is speaking in these absolute terms about the rights of man that are grounded in natural law. They are getting all this language from medieval theologians, like 100%.
Not really. Like, again, natural law, not necessarily Christianity. In fact, you'd be more correct to say not Christianity. It's much more strongly towards the deistic sort of thing.
Well, he might have been sort of taking a sort of deistic stance, but he certainly was. John Locke certainly did think that natural rights came from a god. You know, whether that was the Christian God is up for debate, but it certainly was sort of religious overtones. But you're right; he didn't say they came from Jesus. That he didn't say they you know it was a Christian thing.
It's not inherent. In fact, it's interesting to invoke Locke, because his point wasn't that the idea of rights come from religion, but from nature. underlying religion. If you want to say that it's put there by a creator, you can, but it's not brought to us by any religion. It's part of the world. It's part of the human condition.
I think he sort of referenced Genesis at one point as far as natural rights were concerned. I think he did sort of reference Genesis kind of thing, but you know, Christianity is more about the New Testament. Like I get what he's saying. I get what he's saying, that John Locke and the natural rights, but you know, I don't think that it was exclusively a Christian ideal. I think that because he sort of referenced, and you know, I don't know if he referenced any theologians. I don't know that. I don't know that much about John Locke, but
I mean, he may have, but the thing is, even if he did, that doesn't necessarily represent an invocation to the theology, just the ideas and the thinking, because there was this about the Enlightenment. A lot of the philosophers at the time deliberately secularized their writings, even if they were Christian, because they weren't writing theological treatises, they were writing philosophical treatises.
Right,
they wanted their ideas to be equally applicable in London or New Delhi or Cape Town or Hong Kong, you know?
And I think that there are, you know, other philosophers working in the Enlightenment. It wasn't just John Locke sitting by himself and he's the creator of the entire Enlightenment. Yeah. There was a lot, like we're talking about a lot of discussion between a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. I mean, there were Descartes, there was Rousseau, there was Voltaire, and he was famously an atheist. You know, like we are talking about a lot of discussion between a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. You know, so how much did that influence Locke? Well, you know, you're saying it all came from Christian theologians. Then why was he talking to the other philosophers of the time?
Yeah, it could just come from revelation. But yeah, that's my main point is that I think one of the things that sets the Enlightenment apart is that regardless of what any given philosopher believed, there was that inclination to secularize the views, whereas in previous eras, there was an inclination on penalty of punishment to take something that is clearly secular and theologize it, to say, oh, well, gravity happens because God wants it to, or whatever. Whereas the Enlightenment was the other way around, because it was not only safer, but more practical to pull a Laplace and say that we can explain this without the need for a divine hypothesis in the mix.
Now, what we have nowadays, and something that is not a universally positive development, is that rights are now considered separate from obligations. There's all sorts of discourse around rights as a sword as opposed to rights as a shield. The protection of the weak seems to be the origin of this idea of the inviolable worth of this person. So this person's rights cannot be traded off against the communal greater good. And so rights as a shield was very much at the heart of things. I think this is another example of ways in which Christian intuitions have been taken in post-Christian directions, in ways that are unthinkable without Christianity, but are not what Christians are saying. Why do you describe those as Christian intuitions? You're talking about like this.
Yeah, the idea of Christian intuitions is interesting, but I like that he throws out the post-Christian directions.
Right.
Like, he's very aware that the modern world is beyond Christianity. And in fact, we only get what we think of as Western values as you start to move past Christianity. He's only able to argue that we could only get to past Christianity if Christianity were in the way first.
Right.
We built the wall. It makes us free.
Strong, not oppressing the weak. That there is an inviolable and inherent dignity to each person, such that their rights cannot be traded away. Yeah, that's a Christian thing. I mean, I feel like if you broaden rights to be essentially rules for the sort of protection of how people.
I think phrasing it that way, that isn't even a Christian thing. That's an Abrahamic religion thing. But even if you want to grant that, I don't think you need that phrasing to achieve that end, though. because there's the concept in Hinduism, Buddhism, and the other dharmic faiths, the namaste, you know, the sacred within me sees the sacred within you. We can understand the concept of worth of human life because we perceive our own lives as worthwhile. And so it's a very small cognitive step to say other people's lives are worthwhile too for the same reason as mine.
No, I mean, I could just put that down to empathy and reciprocity, right? Like just, hey, they feel the same as I do, and we should both treat each other the same. That's all that it needs, is those two sort of sentiments kind of thing, those two emotional triggers. So I don't see that as a very big leap.
Yeah, you don't need Imago Dei, but you also see Imago Dei reiterated in other cultures from different origins in different ways.
Yeah, but I think that's just a human thing. I mean, that's why you've got to dehumanize people in order to oppress them. You've got to cast them as not human or some kind of, you know, other non-human, animalistic, or, you know, they're valueless or whatever. You've got to really cast them as that, because naturally people will not want to do that to other people because they know what it's like, or they don't like the feeling of that when it's them. So in some way, you've got to convince them that that person isn't human and doesn't feel human things, because humans will naturally not want to do that to other humans.
Yeah, that's one of the things that made us human, or at least made us the humans we turned out to be, with cities and cooperative efforts and things.
Yeah.
Engage with each other that are based on, you know, a prohibition on the strong being able to oppress the weak. You've got the prologue of Hammurabi's code. Quite explicitly, that's what it says. It says that this is such that the strong should not be able to oppress the weak, and then you've got a load of rules about how people are to engage with each other.
Yeah, and then you've got laws that are different depending on what part of the social strata you're a member of.
It's true, but also in the same way, when you want to talk about, like, you know, rights talk beginning to exist, like in your book, you talk about the Gregorian reforms, which I think you place too much stock in these reforms as being like an origin of rights talk. But even if they are, you're not talking about rights universally. You say, well, it's enough to say that we're beginning to get these inklings of the kind of thing we're talking about. Well, that's what I'm just doing with Hammurabi's code. And you're saying, yeah, but then if you look at the details, I'm saying, well, look at the details of the Gregorian reforms. It was mostly about, you know, like enforcing celibacy amongst the priesthood and saying that secular authorities aren't allowed to, you know, institute clergy members. That has to go straight to the Pope. In fact, it was sort of a reassertion of papal power, which is, I think, quite against the democratic principles which people consider in the West in terms of structural governmental organizations. So,
yes, like, because people don't get to vote for the Pope. It's the cardinals that vote for the Pope. People don't get a choice in Pope. People can vote for the Pope, just not you. That's all. It's the cardinals that do.
Yes. Although I'm reminded of some of those periods when there were two popes, and granted, it was the cardinals who were divided, but the nations sided with one or the other. So in a way, they kind of sort of got to decide.
But it wasn't the people deciding where the nations went at that point. No. It was the aristocracy. Let's face it. It was like the peasants going, well, I think we should support this Pope. No.
I like the Rome Pope. No, I like well, of course, by that point, one of the reasons that kept happening was because of the big fucking schism between Constantinople and Rome in the first place.
Right.
That made other breakoffs possible, because neither church was big enough to destroy the other.
Yeah, but the Eastern Orthodox didn't claim that they had the Pope. They just thought that the Pope was one of a patriarch like the rest of them, the Bishop of Rome. Because don't forget, the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, right? Like, he's just the Bishop of Rome. And they went, well, no, that's just a Bishop of Rome. They should have just as much say as any other patriarch in the city. And the Catholic Church went, die, you fuckers. I mean, you probably don't know this, but they had a crusade. They had a crusade against the Eastern Orthodoxy.
They did. More than one, arguably. Like the what was it, the Fourth Crusade, when they marched through Byzantium and they're like, we're going to go take the Holy Land back from the infidels, and then they turn around and attack Constantinople instead.
Yeah.
Like, you traitorous dogs, how dare you? And that certainly changed history as well. But never mind that. I guess in that way you could credit the Christians. But the point is, once they had that big old fucking schism, it became harder to stomp on other potential schisms, like the crises of multiple popes that happened more than once, and then eventually Martin Luther, and then the churches start fragmenting, you know? Once you've got a crack, once you can no longer stomp on opposition and dissension of ideas, it becomes inevitable that other ideas start breaking loose. Weirdly enough.
The whole thing, I think, is an overemphasis on Christianity and an underemphasis on other potential influences. So when it comes to something like Hammurabi's Code, or when it comes to, I don't know, the Hippocratic Oath, which even today people refer to as the sort of foundation of medical ethics, years before Christianity, thousands of years before Christianity, you have the Hippocratic Oath, or rather, thousands of years before the developments that we're talking about, I should say. Right. You have the Hippocratic Oath, and what does it say? It says that whoever's house I walk into, rich or poor, male or female, I am to serve them. Now, I have absolutely no doubt. Now, I'm not going to say that means our modern Western ethical medical tradition is indebted to Hippocrates, who probably didn't even write that. But I have absolutely no doubt that if that prescription showed up in the letters of Paul, that Christians would be jumping on it as evidence that our modern medical ethic is completely indebted to Christianity. And
oh, that's a really good, different perspective entirely. Is saying you're just taking credit for the shit you happen to have. If you had this other thing, you'd be claiming that as Christian exclusive too.
Right. And, you know, I'm sure there are some Christians out there who absolutely claim that our modern medical ethics are based upon Christian beliefs. You know, there's some people that think that Christianity is responsible for damn near everything. But, you know, we know that original sentiment came from Hippocrates, or the writings of Hippocrates, whether that was him or not, you know, is up for debate. But, you know, there's some people who absolutely claim that it came from Jesus. You know, like they will literally go, well, I know it's the Hippocratic Oath, and I know that it's based upon, you know, what doctors did back in ancient Greece, but it still comes from Jesus.
Yes, Jesus whispered in his ear before he came down or something.
Sure.
I don't know.
Why not? Why not? Like, seriously, it gets a bit ridiculous. You know, it's like that, well, science comes from Christianity, and when you point out that the ancient Greeks were doing science, they're like, well, that wasn't real. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous. By the way, we have updated the Hippocratic Oath. We actually use now the Oath of Geneva, I believe, in accordance with the Geneva Convention.
That's
but people
good.
Just as a shorthand, people just refer to any sort of, you know, the idea that doctors work on behalf of their patients as the Hippocratic Oath. It's a lot different than the original one that Hippocrates penned, but that doesn't detract from Alex's sort of, well, we can trace this back to ancient Greek writings of some variety, and if it was in the Bible, you'd be claiming it was a Christian idea, you know. But nobody's, you know, sort of saying, hey, that the, you know, we owe our you know, medical ethics to Hippocrates himself, you know, and you know, it's ancient Greece. We should thank ancient Greece for all no, it's complex and varied, and there's been a lot of input over the years. Was it influence? Absolutely, a huge influence, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't have been developed without, you know, the ancient Greek writings. Like, we still would have come up with some medical ethics, you know.
Yeah, no doubt. Much like, you know, mathematics, Pythagoras and Archimedes were big in that, but other cultures came up. I mean, hell, calculus was invented completely separately from Newton. But also there's so many other things along those lines that the Christians will try to take credit for, but clearly Darwin, right? Darwin was similarly huge in evolution, and I did an entire deep dive episode just on the inevitability of the things he discovered. He clarified some things. He brought some new examples, some new data, specific sets of data. Look at the fucking finches, look at all these other critters and all that sort of stuff. Very useful. Definitely advanced our knowledge, but there's nothing he did that was unique to him and was not inevitable.
Well,
every single discovery he made.
Yeah, and I often compare that to Cavendish, right? Like, so Cavendish, who did the Cavendish experiment, he's the one that sort of showed that mass causes gravitational attraction. He was an amazing guy, and he was exceptionally, famously shy. Famously, apparently, if you went to a party with Cavendish, you had to stand nearby and talk as if to the air. Right? Like, because if you actually looked at him, focused on him, and asked questions, he would just flee from the party. He would just run away. And, you know, if that isn't sort of autistic coded, I don't know what is. But the
Do not perceive me.
right, like just famously shy. But he didn't publish a lot of his works. People had to convince him to publish stuff. But after he died, we sort of went through the papers that were left behind, and he independently discovered like a ton of things before the inventor of them. He just didn't share them with any. So I think Boyle's law, laws of thermodynamics, he basically discovered them all in his writings. He was an absolute genius, but he didn't share them with anybody. So he isn't credited for the discovery. But it's like, you're absolutely right. They're just things that we will come across. We will discover as we go along. And I think that ethics and you know, ways to govern and, you know, values within society are similar. We just sort of, you know, find the best way to have a functioning society. And because that's what we're after, we just find better ways to do it.
Yeah. Build it. Shoulders of giants is the phrase. I don't know. I really like that do not perceive me thing. It just, I relate. I mean, I'm a person on camera on the internet, but like, I relate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it sort of just is extreme social anxiety, right? Like, it's just, you know, when you talk to somebody, but, you know, he contributed so much. Like, this is the thing. He really did contribute a huge amount to our understanding. So, yeah, I think it's fantastic.
Hell yeah. All right, we are a little bit past halfway, and we're like a minute and a half from the next topic change. So I think we'll finish out this segment, and that'll be a good place to break.
No worries at all.
All right.
I think it's just overemphasized.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that we notice examples of compassion in other cultures is a profoundly Christian thing itself. So, you know, the great exemplar of compassion in the Bible really is the Good Samaritan, where Jesus basically inserts himself, you know, thinly disguised as this beautiful stranger from outside the system, and it's the people of the Bible, people of the book, who are walking on by and leaving the beaten up guy on the side of the road to die. And Jesus has absolutely no qualms about calling the Samaritan the good guy in the story and saying, be less like those Bible guys, be more like that Samaritan.
So Christianity owes its morals to the Samaritans, because without the Samaritans, Jesus couldn't have taught that lesson.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not sure that's his argument, but that's a good point. That's a good point.
I'm just borrowing Glen's logic.
Fair enough. But don't forget, the logic comes from Christianity, okay? You've got to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
Completely, I want to say yay and amen to well done, Hippocrates, or whoever.
But where did he get that idea from?
I think there is such a thing as common grace, right? But the fact that common grace did not institutionalize.
Common grace.
Can't have compassion without Christianity, but the idea comes from a common trait of all humans. Okay.
I think now he's just saying, hey, you know, just sort of human understanding coming from empathy and reciprocity and just natural biological and neurological interactions that we have are common grace from God. So I'm going to claim them as well, right? Like, what the hell, dude? Seriously?
Yeah, we're just saying things now.
Yeah.
And also, One By says, I'm going to insist all people stare at the ceiling when I walk into a room now. That sounds amusing. I was thinking, I'm going to start running around and referring to everything as Cavendish's law. Like when we talk about the laws of thermodynamics, I'll just say Cavendish's laws, and Boyle's law. Nope, it's Cavendish's law.
Cavendish's, yeah.
Related, when I talk about DNA, I tend to say Rosalind Franklin's discovery. Let's credit the right people, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they really care. They're not around anymore. The details.
Things like hospitals, like you can have a Hippocratic oath. You can have Galen can have his manuals of here are the 4 humors and here's how to treat X, Y, and Z. That doesn't institutionalize this thing that is not just for the slave to return him to to economic fruitfulness, and it's not just for soldiers to return them to military service, but it is for the poor and the sick as sick. That scaling and becoming institutional is a unique Christian contribution.
I agree with that, but we need to separate out a few different things, right? Like, for example, you said the fact that we even notice compassion in these other texts is profoundly Christian. Well, I'm only noticing that there because you're telling me that it's something that it's sort of indebted to Christianity. So of course I'm then going to go and look elsewhere and say, well, look, it shows up here. Look, it shows up there.
Well, let's get to that claim, because it came up right near the beginning as well, Glenn, that you say the very fact we preference, compassion, equality, consent, freedom, and so on, is itself coming from our kind of Christianity that we've imbibed. And so when we say, oh look, that culture produced this, we sort of effectively say, selecting based on our Christian values, and sort of saying, but the bad thing that culture produced, is something we now, Alex, I'm hearing you say, Glenn,
that's very perceptive of Justin to say that there is some inherent bias here. There's some cherry picking. We're saying the good thing, that's from Christianity, but the bad thing, that's their problem.
Right. And I think that Glenn would have to basically stick to, well, any kind of empathy or taking care of people around you is sort of is from a God and is therefore a Christian thing. I think that's a little bit absurd. I think that cultures that would have never experienced Christianity or, were completely, I think they still care for one another. Like, as I was saying, like birds care for one another. We've proved this through experimentation. Like, it's not a Christian value or even a human value. It just seems to be something that social organisms do. I don't know how he's going to argue that is inherently Christian, or even inherently religious. Like, wow, I just don't know.
Yeah, it's especially the cultures that predate Christianity, but I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that is the topic shift. Is he's
okay,
moving into where do the non-Christians get their values?
Right. No, this is really interesting. I'm really enjoying it, but I think Glenn's getting thoroughly smacked down, to be honest with you. I think that he, I think that if he took the stance that Christianity has influenced Western values, whatever he is interpreting in that, more than any other thing, he might be able to present a reasonable argument. But he's basically trying to say that Western values are entirely dependent on Christianity. They wouldn't be around without it. Like it's just, it really is just, making a sweeping declaration and then apologetics to try and get it there somehow, to what is obviously our compassion for others, our formation of cities and civilizations, and our propensity towards charity. Like, it's got nothing to do with Christianity. Like, we would do that anyway, regardless of the society that we're in.
Yeah,
like,
it's so diluted that. Do you want Christianity to be the air we breathe, or is Christianity something special that's worth celebrating, praising, whatever? You can't have it both ways.
Well, I think his argument is making it like, well, it's the air we breathe, but we should acknowledge that it's responsible for it. We should give it way more adoration and affection because, in this kind of, it is responsible for everything. So we need to prop it up and give it, bow down to the Christians in our society who are responsible for everything good and have never done anything wrong. which is just bullshit. Like, seriously, I would say that Christianity on the whole has been detrimental for society. If you add up all the wars, all the you know, sort of the hindering of social progress, the hindering of technological progress, all of the inquisitions, everything that it's done, I would argue it's actually on the whole more detrimental for society, which is not to say that Christians haven't been beneficial for society. I just think they've done it in spite of their religion, not because of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a recurring theme all the years we've been doing counter apologetics and atheist activism, is when you do see good things, it's not because of the religion, it's often in spite of it.
Yep.
It's a big oof. Alrighty, so we will re-adjourn next week over at Mark's Place. I'm sure everybody who's still watching at this point is already subscribed to both channels, but on the off chance you're a future person who's made it this far, over 3 hours into part 2 of a debate, and you're still not subscribed, make sure you subscribe to both channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ember, always a good time, always fun channel. I wish I could see more of it. I wish you streamed at a reasonable hour. How dare you? How dare you?
Well, it's getting more chaotic and more random.
I know. Totally.
I'm sure at some point I'll be in the middle of the day for you.
Maybe. Look, I did say to Joe the other day, I did actually that was yesterday. Damn. I sort of said, you know, I feel like if I was to do every stream or see every stream that I wanted to see, I would just like be doing night shift. I would just be awake during the night and sleep during the day, basically. That would be my life. So, which I can't do. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it's rough. We do our best, but I would like to see more what for me is overnight programming, because I love it when Amy Newman's on, but she's not on all that often.
Yeah.
But it's rough. Partly because of my medical stuff and partly because it's so very hard to get any sleep here at all.
Right.
And with the medical stuff, it's important to get sleep when I can. So in those 2 or 3 hours the house is actually quiet, I have to try to sleep during those.
I don't know. I think I'm conditioned for, you know, waking up at a certain time and then going to, you know, I didn't think once you've worked a certain amount of time at a you know, a job, you sort of just, you're conditioned for it. So it's kind of, I mean, sometimes you sleep in, but sometimes you wake up on your days off, just like in the morning when you're usually awake and you're like, well, shit, I wanted to sleep in and it looks like I'm not going to. So yeah, thanks body and brain. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Stupid biorhythms. I blame Christianity.
Yeah. Apparently it's the air we breathe. So, you know, I just find that incredible. It's the air we breathe, and I didn't consider material conditions. It's like, what?
He's a friendly speaker, but he's not a deep thinker.
No, I don't think so. A lot of his stuff is very and a lot of his stuff. I mean, really, I do love that Alex he started to get into a red herring, and Alex went, no, you know what I'm getting at here. Like, stop stop muddying the water, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you're muddying the water. I can see you like creating muddy water right here. Like, you know what I'm getting at. Let's cut through the crap, you know, to what I'm getting at. And I think it was a really good moment because Glenn was like, well, I've got to drop that line because it has no bearing whatsoever. You know, oh, well, they're not platonic ideals. We haven't reached society isn't perfect with what these rights should be. It's like, yeah, but you know what I'm getting at. The idea is an idea. Like, come on, Glenn, seriously, mate. Honestly.
I mean, even the idea of platonic ideas is fundamentally not Christian.
Well, sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's so funny.
Right.
I don't know. But I think I may have put my finger on why you and to some extent Matt Dillahunty excel at debates. People can't get away with splitting hairs for y'all.
Wow. You're assuming the only hair that I just don't have hair on my head. I still have eyebrows. I have hair. I have eyebrows.
I was expecting a how dare you?
Really? Okay. Well, no, I'm not offended or anything.
I'm just a silly bean, and I'm very tired and on a lot of drugs. So, weird stuff comes out from time to time.
I think it'd be a lot worse if they were forced to split your nostril hair or something. I mean, come on now.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That
You didn't think
suck.
about that. Yeah.
No. I failed to consider the material conditions.
Yeah. Well, it happens to the best of us.
So I've heard. Alrighty, Mark, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all so much for joining, whether you're watching live or in the future, or if you're not watching, then I can't thank you for being here because you won't hear me. But I hope you're having a wonderful time wherever you are. And yeah, more shenanigans ahead. Stay tuned. Keep a weather eye, and as always, until next time, try not to die. Toodles.
Bye.
Slight delay in the Thanks to all our patrons and top-level members for April. Miranda, Karen Butcher, Jimmy Tux, Ian Chen, Maya Adkison, Jessica the Trans Metal Alchemist, Robin Webster, Lilith, Ember Lynn, The Barely Bearable Atheist, Eric Wander, Jason Jacoby, Lil of All Trades, Deviant Outcast, Secular Feelinist, Geo Sam, Thriver's Scapegoat, Katie Bluebird, and Noise Ending. And you can add your name here next month by signing up at patreon.com/betterthanember or by joining Emberships here on YouTube at the Cinder level, which also includes all the custom emojis, tons of member-exclusive content, member-only live streams, and a bunch of other stuff. I deeply appreciate all the supporters who keep this channel going. Thank you all so much. Because of you, we're building a wonderful community that I'm very proud of.